Question for you, Jimmy Cook.
Potentially an answer for you, Jay Query.
Do you smell something? Do you hear something lurking from around the corner?
I do, but I can't quite pinpoint what it is.
Eddie, yourself, do you happen to, is there a breeze by chance?
I think so. I felt it at my feet.
I did too. I felt a slight breeze. Something, I was like there's something in the air. And the air's thicker. It's humid. Here we are in June. It's hot. It's humid. And then I thought, oh, I know what it is. I figured out what it is. Jimmy, do we have a WNBA win streak blowing through?
I think we do.
I think we do we not?
3 straight now, right? Let's go.
Yeah. Cashing it in, right? What's that sound effect like when people, I think it's in movies, when, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's like, you know what I mean? Like
when something glorious happens.
Yeah.
Oh,
like that's happening right now before our very
Yeah.
eyes with the Indiana Fever, is it not?
Mm-hmm.
But for a couple of reasons. And I'm just going to give the peek behind the curtain for people, okay? We're supposed to be radio theater of the mind. Last night, a buddy of mine was at a work convention in Chicago. And he sends me a text and he goes, hey, I was at this work convention and there are people from all over the Midwest, and I happened to mention that I grew up in Indianapolis, and the guy at my table was from Indianapolis, and your name came up. And I'm like, really? He said, yeah, because he likes your radio show. And I said, well, I don't know why people would like the radio show, other than at the very least I can say, and I think you guys, this is true of you as well, and certainly it's true of JMV, but what you hear on the radio, excluding the occasional moments of flippancy, what you hear on the radio is pretty much me, right? I mean, like, yeah. I'm not some character. I don't come in. I just come in and this is who I am, right?
Wait a minute. You're telling me, hand to God, that you are this humble in real life as you are on the radio? I mean, because the humility is usually the best trait of you. Well, that's why I was
there's a long list of my greatness. Humility's at the top, for sure.
But that is the motto of the show is very much, it would be the same thing you'd hear if you were at a sports bar.
That's right.
And they ran into you.
And the motto of the show is that we educate and entertain, but not necessarily in that order. But here's the thing.
That's, of course, after he blows the keg.
Yes, naturally.
That's right. I've got to order. The third order, actually, they have a beer for me. So the peek behind the curtain, because I'm keeping it real for people, right, is this. When you work in sports talk radio, this is when we earn our money these months, because the topics, and I appreciate very much so, and certainly strongly encourage, beg, that all of you continue to listen to us, up until Colts training camp. But obviously the topics are fewer. I mean, people know this in the summertime. And you also have people on vacation and kids at camp and everything else. And kids love this show. They love it.
The numbers are crazy.
I know. We've had a lot of research on that, and they just keep coming back positive about how much kids love the program.
I've actually heard some studies done in some groups that actually say if your children are acting up and you listen to this show, maybe even sometimes the language might be threatening them with this show, they behave more. I don't know.
That's right.
It's still in its early development study case, but that's what they've shown.
That is true. Yep. It is used as a parenting tool. But the glimpse behind the curtain that I will offer for all of you today, the listeners of Query and Company here on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. For those of you that tune in and you enjoy hearing Jimmy Cook, who you just heard from, or Eddie Garrison,
thank you,
manning controls for us, or myself.
We thank you dearly.
We do thank you dearly. And here's the thing. There are strategy sessions that take place in laying out shows for June, July, and the first part of August, because the topics of conversation typically wane in Indianapolis. We do not have a Major League Baseball team. We have an NFL team that takes a bit of a hiatus, at least in terms of their activity. And we have an NBA team that doesn't necessarily, at the time, seem to be one that's going to be a major player in the NBA draft, although they're coming off a great year. But, and can you do that sound effect for me, Jimmy? The one. Oh. Thank you. In this, the 2024 version of Sports Talk Radio in Indianapolis, Indiana, we thank the radio and sports gods because we have major topics of conversation, and it's fun. The Fever have been a big topic of conversation, not because we're trying to make it so, not because they got off to a slow start and people thought there was going to be a great start for them and they were going to be a WNBA contender out of the box, but because they had the most famous female athlete in basketball. I mean, arguably the most famous female athlete in the country currently in the midst of their playing days right here in Indiana. And people thought, okay, well, they got Caitlin Clark. Let's see what she can do. She's going to come in and immediately be LeBron. And there has been a molding and acclimating process that has taken place with that. But it's starting to come together, and they're starting to do what, at the very least, teams trying to get footing are supposed to do, which is beat the teams you're supposed to beat. The WNBA schedule is tough because there are so few teams. And the competition is stout for that exact same reason. But the Fever are doing what they should be doing at this point, and that is winning the games they're supposed to win, taking care of business, and trying to move forward. And they are, quite frankly, Jimmy, more balanced. And what I'm curious to ask Christie Sides, for example, who is going to join the program today. Eddie, is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Head coach of the Fever. One of the things I want to ask her is this because, and I've asked this a lot, I'll ask Pat Boylan this when we have him on, are we seeing Caitlin Clark kind of taking the step to mold into and figure out her teammates and mesh into them, or are they meshing into Caitlin Clark's style of play? And maybe the answer is both, which is an easier answer. But it's fun to talk about. And then you have the swimming trials, which continue to be a major story, and we're going to talk about that as well today. But it is cool. Now, one thing I noticed, Jimmy, with this U.S. swimming trials, when you think about shows that, if you think about summertime, television patterns also wane in the summer because people are staying outside for longer. They're not inside. They're at baseball. They're doing different things. But the networks start showcasing, a lot of times in the summertime, you'll see on the networks, the new primetime version of Wheel of Fortune for a month, or Celebrity Press Your Luck, those kinds of things.
ABC Summer Games and Fun.
Correct. All those things, right? And one of the network shows that you see are these kind of gimmicky, inside of a dark studio somewhere, like physical challenge shows. And they're fun. They're popular. Gladiators comes to mind. What's the one that, maybe it is Gladiators. What's the one that was down here on the Monument Circle?
American Ninja Warrior.
Ninja Warrior, which is a good show, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then going back further, when they had that diving show where they almost killed Louis Anderson. What was that called? Splash, I think?
Yeah, and you referenced it a week or two ago.
Yeah, well, they had Louis Anderson as one of the contestants, and they forgot to ask if he can swim. And everything went awry, and he jumped in. He tried to dive, and he jumped in, and he was wearing a leotard, and then he jumped in the water, and all hell broke loose. And they had to call in, the Burbank Fire Department. It was ugly.
I know you've been on a golf kick lately as well. Did you get into, over the last 3 summers, I don't know if it's still back or not, but the holy moly phase? Where they took miniature golf and they took
no, but that would be awesome.
They took Rob Riggle and Joe Tessitore. It was Steph Curry's creation, and they just had people play a crazy obstacle course of mini golf.
Yes, and that was outdoors though.
It was outdoors.
But the ones that are indoor, these shows that are indoor, particularly the diving one with Les Louis Anderson, the ninja one, and they're always in dark studios with blue lights bouncing back and forth all over the place, right? And you can't see anything, but it's like a spotlight. And that's what the diving thing is. When I was there, I was like, that's exactly what it felt like. It was kind of dark inside Lucas Oil Stadium, but you had, and I get it, it's red, white, and blue, right? You had these blue and red lights kind of dancing all over the place. But it is cool. And again, last night I watched it, and I'm like, I don't pretend that means that people in Flagstaff, Arizona are sitting on their couch like, you know what? Let's go take a vacation in Indianapolis. That looks cool. But it is a great showcase for the city and just for people to see the skyline and realize that, in fact, we're not Omaha. And it's pretty cool.
And I can't remember where I saw the piece, so I apologize that I'm not going to credit anybody because I don't want to be wrong. But I did see a handful of news outlets talking with, the committee of Indiana Sports Corp and those that put on these great events, saying that they're throwing their hat in the ring, or it looks like they're trending towards throwing their hat in the ring for 2028. And Jake, you talked about this maybe being a, pardon the pun, watershed moment for the city's return to the national and global sports stage. as a place to go to have great events and have great events done the right way with incredible volunteer work and incredible atmosphere and attention to detail, and it feeling like the very top that this country has to offer, because it's what we do in this great state, in this city. But the idea of them already looking forward to maybe trying to put a bid on the trials for 2028 is cool, and could be, again, to your point earlier in the week, something you look back on and say, yeah, this was the moment that reestablishment, not that we went anywhere. Some would say, I never left, right, for Indianapolis, but there has been tough times post-COVID, and the fact that year over year the city is returning to stride, and now here we are back in the national spotlight, and maybe again in the national spotlight in 4 years. It's been really cool and a testament to all the hard work that has gone into this event.
I'm telling you. Can you do me a favor, Jimmy?
Mm-hmm.
Look up for me host cities of the Summer Olympics. Matter of fact, look up American host cities of the Summer Olympics. You had it in Los Angeles in 1984. You had it in Atlanta in 1996, right? The Winter Games have been in Salt Lake City. They've been obviously in Lake Placid. I know there are other American cities that have hosted the Summer Olympics. Are you looking by any chance before you?
Yeah, so this is an article from 2021, so that wouldn't be impacted by any.
I don't mean future, I mean past.
No, I understand.
Okay.
I was making sure that we were
Right.
on a proper timeline. You're right. Atlanta Games, obviously, in 1996. Lake Placid has held the Winter Olympics twice in New York, 1932, and then again in 1980. Same kind of time frame for Los Angeles, but for the Summer Olympics, 1932, 1984. Salt Lake City, the Winter Olympics in 2002. Squaw Valley, the Winter Olympics in California in 1960. St. Louis, Missouri in 1904.
Okay.
And that's your list.
So since 1900, there have been 3 U.S. cities to host the Summer Olympics. And yes, they did 2 of them within, I guess it would have been 4 Olympics of one another. I've mentioned this on several occasions, but I think even more so now we are seeing the possibility. Not only are these Olympic trials, to me, watershed in terms of bringing back Indianapolis in terms of big national events to take advantage of the walkability of Indianapolis for the first time since COVID. And yes, I know we had the All-Star game, but it was in the winter. A lot of that was indoors, and a lot of it was private events. In terms of just like people walking around with open-aired restaurants and bars downtown and feeling the buzz. If you were a businessman from Bismarck and you came to Indianapolis for your insurance convention and you were walking around downtown and you walked into District Tap, you immediately are able to tell that the swimming finals are taking place because there's people walking around in swimming gear and, I mean, not Speedos, but you know what I mean, T-shirts and whatever else. And that's the first time that that's happened in Indy to that level probably since pre-COVID, in all fairness. There have been other events that have come through. I get it. But in terms of the summer atmosphere buzz like that. The other thing that this event has done that I think would be easy to overlook, but I think it should be noted. You have a natatorium inside of an NFL stadium. You have even though it's a multi-purpose stadium and the Colts are just a tenant, you have a multi-purpose 70 or 65,000 seat venue that is primarily built for football, that hosts other sports, that was molded into a natatorium, even though we have a world-class level natatorium 5 blocks away. What I'm saying is it shows that this city has the ability to repurpose venues for bigger stage. What I've said for years, and people are like, I just don't think it can happen. We're not there yet. I understand that. But it wasn't raining when Noah built the Ark. And we didn't have an NFL team when we built the RCA Dome. I do personally believe that within the next, probably in your guys' lifetime, not necessarily mine, but I think that in the next 50 years or so, the time, and people are going to laugh when I say this, but Atlanta in 1970, Atlanta's a major city, But in 1960 or 1970, Atlanta was still a major city, but it wasn't the Atlanta that we know today. It was not a regional hub. There are certain cities that are regional hubs. Chicago's the regional hub of the Midwest. Seattle's the regional hub of the Pacific Northwest. Phoenix is the regional hub of the Southwest. And Atlanta's the regional hub of the Southeast. I get it. Birmingham considers Atlanta its big brother. Charlotte considers Atlanta its big brother. Indianapolis considers Chicago its big brother. So Indianapolis is a tier below. I get that. But when you think about the venues that are here, Jimmy, and now the fact that we have tangible proof and evidence that we can take larger venues and repurpose them into Olympic-level venues, why not start strategizing and thinking long-term and getting the ball rolling on the vision, at the very least, the vision of the next, our children's generation of having Indianapolis be the host city for an international Olympic Games, Summer Olympics. Name a sport that we would not be able to accommodate. Because if you think about it, like when the Olympics were in Atlanta, not everything was in Atlanta. Like when the Summer Olympics were in London, you had events that were taking place like in Sheffield and like in other areas of that region or even in Tokyo, like throughout Japan in different areas. You could literally, if the Summer Olympics were in Indianapolis, and I know this sounds crazy. I realize people right now are like, what is this dude talking about? I get it. But at the same time, in 1970, if you would have talked about Indianapolis hosting an NFL team and ultimately a Super Bowl, people would have been like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But you had to have a vision, right? You got to have a footprint. We've done the Pan Am Games. We've done the trials. We've done the track and field trials. We've done the swimming trials. We've done the diving trials in the past. The different venues, I mean, between Eagle Creek State Park or City Park or whatever it is, and all the way up to Lafayette, all the way down probably to Louisville, all the way over to Dayton, Ohio. Indianapolis would be the epicenter of it, but this region, it could be done. And to me, this event, seeing a pool being airdropped into a multi-purpose 70,000-seat venue shows that Indianapolis has both the vision and the experience now to configure things for events. I say let's go. What do you say? 20... What are we at right now? 2024? 2099. That's the vision. 2099. 2099 Summer Olympics, Indianapolis. Well, Jake, what good's that going to do? You're not even going to be alive. I get it. But you've got to have a vision beforehand, right? 2099 is probably a stretch. It doesn't have to wait that long. We could probably do it within 2056.
Are you, and I just want to throw this out here just because I'm not going to like poo-poo this idea. Like, who wouldn't love the idea of Olympics coming to your city that you grew up in? Are you, for example, with the World Cup coming in 2026, which is, you look at the calendar of international sport, Olympics are the creme de la creme, but the World Cup is falling closely behind in terms of the international fandom for that sport and the dollar revenue that would follow with it. Sometimes with international bids, there wind up being shared locations,
right?
Shared cities. Would you be against, say, a world where it's a Indianapolis-Chicago bid?
No, that's what I'm, well, I would want Indianapolis to, I mean, yeah, I get it. Like for Indianapolis to be, maybe Indianapolis is the, kind of like, bad analogy here, okay? The American Dairy Association of Indiana with the presenter, this, we had them on, the
Sure.
presenter that gives the milk to the winner of the Indy 500. You have the veteran, and then you have what's called the rookie, the one that spends a year watching the process, and then the next year they're the ones presenting the milk. So maybe Indianapolis is the rookie and Chicago's the veteran, and Indianapolis. But no, I would want it to be Indianapolis. Like, in other words, at some point I want Indianapolis to say, we appreciate and we love and we adore and we respect and we admire Chicago's place as the big brother. But we're ready to walk on our own here. So I get it. For example, somebody just sent me a thing. 96 in the Olympic Games, they went to a venue at RFK Stadium as part of the Atlanta Olympics in RFK Stadium. So you can outsource some of the events, but I want the
be
T-shirts.
the one doing the outsourcing.
I want the T-shirt saying Indianapolis.
Okay.
Now I would imagine Chicago would not be down with that of playing the facilitator, right?
No.
Maybe Indianapolis. Maybe you start it by, if Chicago were to get a bid, Indianapolis being the auxiliary.
Sure.
But I'm telling you, I understand the lunacy of it right now in 2024. But if you and hotel space is the biggest challenge. Hotel space would be the biggest challenge. But if you start talking about, and who knows what sort of like availability we might have of transport of people, let's say if one of the events is in Dayton or in Louisville, or for that matter as far over as St. Louis, to do some of the events but you have the opening games in Indianapolis, and you have the closing games in Indianapolis, and then the Torch Cauldron in Indianapolis for like 30 years until a hotel comes, and then apparently they take that out. But here's the thing. We really, I mean, this is a city that was ready and a state that was ready to have a discussion. I'm not saying they were willing to do it, but they were ready to have a discussion about, there was a discussion. I'm not saying how far the discussion went, but if we are a city that was willing to have a discussion or hear out the possibility of giving $1 billion, with a B, $billion to a minor league soccer, not even minor league, but to a lower tier soccer team, just in the hopes and the wing and the prayer that it would get into the MLS and then allow them to bury on an old cemetery that's leaking oil, then what the hell? I mean, all bets are off. Let's go.
Sure.
Let's start thinking about bigger things here.
Look, the idea, to your point, and I know this is kind of apples and oranges to some extent, but just because I have it up, going back to the World Cup analogy, the idea of like, and no disrespect, I love going to this particular city I'm about to reference, so it's hard for this not to sound disrespectful, but like, for the World Cup sites in 2026, most of it is West Coast, East Coast sites. It's a joint bid that is split between Canada, Mexico, and the United States as the host countries, and I don't want to get too much in the weeds here, but the only central United States location is Kansas City. I mean, if Kansas City is good enough to host World Cup matches, then yes, I believe Indianapolis, when we've seen high-level proof that they can host the biggest events that this country has to offer, I would not fight you on the idea that they could host the biggest event the world has to offer.
Hey, Jake, of all your ideas, this is by far the worst. No Olympics. It's a boondoggle for the economy of everywhere it occurs. I don't disagree with that. I mean, I think more so like the World Cup, you hear that also. Like in Brazil, there's like 3 different multi-million dollar, hundreds of million dollar stadiums that are now just empty because they used them for 3 weeks.
Correct. But the reason it's better here is because those stadiums are already in use. The issue where you talk about losing money is when they're just built for that and they just sit and rot.
Correct. That's what I'm talking about. It's a matter of
already infrastructure in place.
Correct.
Yeah.
And using it to bring in others.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You got to get others to come to play. So I don't disagree. And listen, you hear nobody that jumps up and down more about the absurdity of money being spent publicly for sports than myself, right? So I get that. I don't want to be a total hypocrite here. That makes – I'm on board with that. I understand that point. I'm just saying, if nothing else, we've seen the blueprint now that whoever would have thought when can you imagine on the day, and it wasn't as long ago as people think, but on the day that Bob Irsay and Bill Hudnut walked out onto the 50-yard line of the Hoosier Dome, arm in arm, and somebody turns around and goes, here's what's weird. They just got a team now, and this stadium is really cool with this roof, and then eventually, though, here's what's going to happen. Everybody loves coming into this stadium and this roof, and then there's a kid in Bedford that is such a good high school basketball player that eventually they're going to move the state finals here as well. What are you talking about, the state finals? They play that at Market Square. No. They do now, but they're going to move that to here. Well, you can't put a basketball court in the middle of the stadium. Well, they're going to, because they're also going to put the Final Four there in 1991. And in a couple of weeks here, Willie Mays is going to get a base hit on this because they're going to do a baseball game here. Well, what are you talking about? This is a football stadium. Now, I understand all that. But here's what's in. Follow me here because I know it's 1984, and I know that we both want to go home real quick and watch Punky Brewster. But I wanted to let you know, and we can talk about it tomorrow over lunch at GD Ritzy's. But eventually, this stadium within the next 20 years is going to be 23 years is going to be torn down because they're going to build a bigger stadium that's going to host a Super Bowl because the Colts are going to actually win one. And in addition to that, that building is they're going to build a pool inside of it, and the Olympic swim trials are going to be there. Now, if you'd have said that to somebody in 1984, they'd have said, That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard until 2024 when some idiot is going to talk on the radio about Indianapolis eventually hosting the Summer Olympics.
I hope you were nice enough when you told them all of that to also buy Apple at 6 cents a share. I hope you gave them at least some financial advice.
Can you imagine that? Can you imagine? Or Microsoft. You know, I had a buddy from high school. I've said this before. That during the Seattle grunge craze moved out to Seattle just to live in Seattle and got a job as a forklift operator at some warehouse company slinging books. And he was one of the first 100 employees of Amazon. He now lives on an island. True story. But can you imagine, like, how much was Apple stock? Was it 6 cents?
I mean, I know it was very. I don't know, and I don't know when it was.
If you could go back in
traded,
time, would you buy the stock? If you could go back, would you buy the initial first month stock in Apple, Amazon, or Microsoft?
Apple.
Eddie?
Microsoft.
I think Eddie might be right. I don't know the answer to that, but I think Eddie may be right. Amazon's way up there, though, man. Although Amazon's way up there. If you'd have bought the initial stock, like $1,000 initially, I wonder what. We'll let Jimmy look that up. That fabulous. If you invested $1,000 at the original sale of stock, which one would be the most profitable for you today? Eddie, you have a very smug look on your face. Are you looking it up and already getting the answer?
According to my research, right now I've got Microsoft at 4.44 and Apple at 209.86.
No, you're talking about the, what, $4 billion is what it'd be worth?
Yeah.
If you'd bought $1,000 worth initially, you're saying it's now worth $4 billion?
Trying to make sure that it's billion, yeah.
Well, then you get into those things where you got to count all the zeros. If you're counting zeros already, you know it's a pretty good thing. By the way, Pat Boylan going to join us coming up at the top of the hour. Christie Sides, head coach of the Fever, at 1:30. Rowdy Gaines going to join us. We're going to talk a little swimming again, right? Because yesterday, Josh said we don't talk enough swimming. I turn on the show, you're talking stocks and domes and GD Ritzies, and there's swimming going on. Well, Rowdy Gaines is going to join us 2:30 today, right?
Was that the son of the old man?
Yeah, that's Josh 128605537, right?
You forgot the 4. There's a 4 in there somewhere.
Yep.
The bots are good though because they listen to the radio somehow, which is impressive, right? But Josh joined X Twitter 2 weeks ago, and he has sent 9 tweets, and they're all to this show.
It released in 1980 at $22 per share. I'm not going to get fully in the weeds on this.
Well, see, because it's split like 100 times.
Well, yeah, they've
right?
had things called. So this is from the Motley Fool. They have broken it down, so I don't need to ramble. 1 share of Apple would now be 56 shares today based on stock splits. Those shares would be worth $14,896 at the current price of $266 per share. That's if you just bought 1 share back in 1980 because of all the splits. So if you bought multiple shares back in 1980, I mean, sky's the limit there. But there you go.
Okay, I'll look up Microsoft during the break. You want Apple? So that's Apple, right?
Yeah. And I mean, maybe Amazon's the answer. I have no idea. But I just know that the big joke in sitcoms or time travel is always, man, I should have bought Apple at
For sure.
$8 a share,
no question,
whatever it was.
right? I don't know what year like Amazon first was on the exchange. 97? Is that right?
Probably.
If you bought 1 share from Amazon in 1997,
97, look at you.
it's the equivalent of 240 shares today. So, not bad, right? It was $18 a share in 1997. Is that right? Okay. I don't know. I'll figure out that math, and we'll let you know on the other side, and I'm sure people will be thrilled.
I think Amazon's the answer, by the way.
Pat Boylan saves us at 1 o'clock.
This hour of The Fan is fueled by
This Olympic thing's what I was thinking about all night long. Finally came to me. I was dancing on the ceiling.
Happy birthday, Lionel.
Is it really?
Yep.
I was
Wow,
a member of the
happy
Lionel
birthday.
Richie fan club in 1983. Thank you very much. First concert I ever attended. Lionel Richie, Tina Turner.
I didn't ask.
Well, I told you. How old? Can I guess Lionel's age?
Yeah.
Let's see. I'm going to guess that Lionel Richie is, now he was the lead singer, of course, of the Commodores. I know that you guys both knew that.
Uh-huh.
He either went to or is from Tuskegee. I'm going to guess that Lionel Richie is
The show ends at 3.
74 years old.
Oh, you're close.
What is he?
75.
Oh,
Is he really?
man. Closest not going over.
Looks good for 75, man.
So both showcase
I think there's
winner
been
bet.
some work done there, right?
Oh, for sure. For sure.
But Lionel's a cool dude. Lionel Richie's a cool dude. He had a pair of cool, like, gray leather shoes on the cover of, what was the name of it? Not his second the big album that one came off of. He was sitting in a chair with the chair backwards. It's just a cool dude, Lionel Richie. But this Olympic thing, I'm telling you, like, David Woods of the Indy Star said, he wrote an article about that in 1996. Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. I get it. I mean, the building of the Olympic Stadium would be the biggest thing that would be probably the obstacle. Although we could find another big cemetery to put it on and do that, and then maybe in the meantime we can have some, I don't know, this time let's get a petroleum company that bailed on it and left a bunch of oil and gas lines. That'd be cool, right? Speaking of gas, I wanted to mention this also. Kansas City fan Steve, Chiefs fan Steve, your brother and
Further in arms, the way
That's
you
right.
want to go there?
who of course I've told you, he drives around a fuel truck for a living, and he's one of those scammers that's always putting the
Right.
different gas in.
Jimmy, you're finally going to meet him, right?
I believe so.
person?
Yes.
Yeah.
He's going to be there July 18th. Thank you, Eddie, for mentioning that. He will be at the Back Nine Golf Tournament July 18th, presented by Franciscan Health at the Back Nine, which is just south of downtown. It's fantastic, especially if you're up on the third floor hitting shots and you're looking over downtown. You can see it right there. Tickets are available right now at 1075thefan.com. We've got food. We've got drinks. Jack Daniels is going to be one of the sponsors, so they'll have fabulous beverages there. Franciscan Health Foundation will benefit from a silent auction of experiences and great items that will be there as well. We would love for you to be there. Chiefs fan Steve, his wife Brenda will be there, and they will be celebrating because their dog Milton, who's the greatest rescue dog and one of the unofficial dogs of the program, not named Joey or Kobe Walsh, little Milton, who had a cancer scare, went to the vet today. All clear.
Awesome.
All clear for
That's
Milton.
great news.
Milton, the rescue dog, is hanging out with his mom. He's got a little Chiefs
Bandana?
collar. He's got a
Collar?
little, he's got a little collar, a little Chiefs collar that
nice.
he wears.
I love it.
But nonetheless, Milton's good to go. Okay, Jimmy, let's get back into the subject at hand, which is, because we're going to talk to Boylan and Christie Sides coming up, and that is the fever, just in terms of, it does seem like, and I don't know how much you watched of last night, but we talked about this with Caitlin Clark coming into the WNBA and the fact that, she was such a dynamic logo-style shooter, and they're starting to find ways to use that, but it is her other areas statistically where she's really starting to kind of hit a stride, and I really do think that's because she is figuring out the versatility and talent level of her teammates, and that's not, I'm not sitting here saying that the rest of the roster, like, oh, well, it's because Caitlin Clark was the smarter one to figure it. That's not what I'm saying. She's a young player, and there are very good players and established players on this roster, and she is figuring out now that she doesn't need to be the constant Steph Curry outside shooter. That's a bonus for sure, but I don't know that that's exactly what jumpstarts their offense, and they're starting to find some balance there.
The thing that we emphasized a ton going into draft night, going into preseason, and the lead up to this season was there's going to be growing pains inherently for any rookie, even someone as talented as Caitlin Clark, as dominant a player, one of the best, if not the best, to ever play collegiately. Even someone as talented as her faces growing pains when you take a step up to the very best that a sport has to offer. And those growing pains are going to be found in a lot of different ways. They were going to be found in the physicality of the way you're being guarded. They were going to be found in the decision-making of going through a process where even though it was a fun game to watch when she was at Iowa and it was a fun team to watch, you knew that the talent was going to be inherently better at every position because of what is established and what the Fever have been trying to build with the likes of Nalissa Smith and Aaliyah Boston, et cetera, for this roster. And Kelsey Mitchell, like this whole team has been a acquisition process that, yes, has been spent in the lottery, but you felt like when Caitlin Clark arrived, it was going to be potentially anyway, the final piece to this puzzle. But she was going to have to understand that I don't need to be the hero. I don't need to be the only person stirring the drink on this roster. I need to figure my game out at this level. I need to figure out how I work best with the pieces that are already here, particularly Aaliyah Boston. And then once I figured that out, my natural given abilities as a scorer, as a passer, as an electric athlete will take shape themselves. I don't need to worry about those. We know those are there. It's figuring out place, positioning, timing, passing lanes, driving angles, speed that this league offers. It's finding your lane in that. And it was always going to take time. And just because her statistical averages are up pretty much across the board, she's up in points, she's about the same in rebounds, and up in assists in terms of where she was maybe a couple of games ago or early on in the season as she gets more comfortable. As that has happened, so too, to that end, Jake, the familiarity with her teammates of how to be utilized by her and how to utilize her situationally. The big test for them moving forward, which was what Christie Sides had pointed out to us, Pat Boylan to a larger extent outlining to us how tough this schedule was out of the gate for them. They are now showing on a consistent basis, not just one game or a flash in the pan. You're seeing it now over a stretch where they're proving to you they are no longer one of those bad teams. They are better than those bad teams. Right, the question now remains, how far away are they, or if you want to be glass half full, how close are they to being in the conversation with the very best that the league has to offer? Because that's still a place they've struggled. But you can't see how you are against those great teams until they come up again on the schedule. It's a cliche, but it's a fact of sport, and it's a fact of where the Fever are at in the season. You can't do anything but play who your opponent is. And to this point, their body of work this season has been they are going to take care of business against the opponents they should beat. Does the lessons they've learned and they've displayed against those opponents now translate to games against the Aces or the Sun or the Liberty or the Lynx? Is it still there when the opponent changes? That's the big area for growth for me that I still want to see. That said, I'm incredibly proud of the adversity of the Fever. I'm incredibly proud of the growth across the board. Nalissa Smith, Aaliyah Boston, Kelsey Mitchell, Caitlin Clark, the whole roster, the way they've started to gel together over this stretch. Does it sustain, though, or is this just another uptick in what's going to be an up and down expected ebb and flow rookie season with Caitlin Clark?
Jimmy, when I started working here at this radio station, I was on the morning show with Kevin Bowen and Mark Dykton, of course, for 18 months, maybe 19 months. That's not to say that you were waking up every morning to listen, to the radio, to the morning show. I'm not saying that, but you were of relative familiarity with what I sounded like on the radio, as was I with you, correct? Because you had been on this program and I had heard it, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So we had a baseline of familiarity. Yet, when you and I combined, when was that? August, Eddie? Is that right? Last August?
Yeah. You want the specific date? I can give you the specific date.
I'm going to go with August.
Eddie has it tattooed on his left ankle.
I'm going to go with August 8th. That's
too early.
August 17th.
27th.
Now you're too late.
How was I?
What'd you say?
17th.
You're still early.
21st.
Bingo.
There it is.
So on August 21st, even though we both had familiarity with the way that the two of us did radio, I think if we were to go back and listen to it, I mean, I don't know this, but I'm just saying, and it's not like it felt that way in the vacuum. But if we went back and listened, I'll bet that our pregnant pauses are stepping over the other one. Just the tendencies in terms of the flow of doing a radio show together were probably inferior to what it is now, because it takes a while to figure it. Even though we were familiar with one another, once you are in the actual, the arrows are flying past you at one time, it takes a while to figure out the cadence of the other. And it's the same thing. Caitlin Clark was probably well aware of Aaliyah Boston and Smith's playing style, and she can look at all the films she wants, even though she was literally here like 3 weeks after she left college, and vice versa. But like anything else, it does take time. Just the overall timing takes time. And knowing and anticipating where someone is, that takes an acclimation period. And I'm glad that people seemingly stuck it out. And I'm not saying that acclimation period is complete, but clearly it is ahead of where it was a month ago. And it was ugly there in the beginning. I mean, and there are still going to be, to your point, some ugly days, right? Do you ever look at pictures of yourself in middle school?
Yes, sure.
Like, do you ever look at pictures now and you think to yourself, how did my parents let me leave the house?
Yes.
When I was in high school, you know what a big thing was when I was in high school? And I look at it now and I go, how is this allowed? I have a picture of myself my senior year at North Central. And you know what I'm wearing?
Leather pants.
No, because that was more 80s, but not a bad call.
Jean shorts.
Close, even worse.
Leg warmers?
Even worse. I have
tutu?
a picture of me senior year of high
Capris.
school, going to school. Just going to school. I got up and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to school today. I'm wearing a Kansas basketball jersey. I had a T-shirt on underneath it, right? With cut-off medical scrubs. What?
Sick.
Like, what?
Sick fit.
I mean, how ridiculous is that?
We need to recreate that.
I'll try to find the photo somewhere, but that was like passable. My parents let me leave the house like that. Right? And then, so this kind of like automatic, like the kind of the overall sexiness that radiates and oozes from me, it didn't happen overnight.
Mm-hmm.
There are times, I look back at photos and I'm like, what was I doing? So same thing. Everything takes time.
Rome wasn't built in a day.
That's right.
Nor was jQuery.
It was built in 50 years. And year 51, let me tell you, it's the Taj Mahal, right?
Exactly.
That much we know. NBA draft is upcoming, by the way. What does that mean for the Pacers? And could there be some shakeup on the roster? Because right now it looks fairly set. We'll elaborate next.
It's JMV. The July 4th sale is on to miss him.
When I hear this song, I think of the Seinfeld 100 episode show where they did the montage of Seinfeld highlights to this song. That probably shows my age as opposed to reminds me of second grade, 1980. But it's a good song. Thank you, Eddie, for firing that up.
You're welcome.
Back in my day, Michael, I remember he was on the Wiz. That fella could move. Okay. The Pacers have the 36th pick in the draft, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Eddie, when I do the old man voice, you're like the Pillsbury Doughboy.
I just think it's funny.
You get this little look and you go, literally, I
It's
can
Christmas
hear it.
morning
It's like
every
an
time.
old British man who's lost his accent is what it reminds me of.
I think of that guy that I'm doing the voice of. He's on his porch and he's wearing just socks and shorts and a tank top.
Got a nice glass of tea.
Or perhaps cut off surgical pants. But when I do that voice, literally, I look over at you, and I'll sit here and I'll say, Pace was better than the 36th pick. I remember back. And I look at you, and you're like, and you look like the Pillsbury Doughboy.
Thank you.
I don't know that that's necessarily
Is that an insulation joke you're making?
It's not even. It's just the Pillsbury Doughboy's a cute fella, right?
That's right.
I mean, he's a lovable little guy.
Buy my biscuits.
Hey, they're fluffy.
Yes, they have picks 36, 49, and 50.
Okay, let me read to you some of the 36th picks in the NBA draft.
Kevin McCullough. Can I guess that one?
Wait, he's talking about yesteryear, right?
Correct. These are picks that have been selected 36th over the course of the years. Andre Jackson Jr. Cody Martin. Not a bad player, right?
Solid player, yeah.
Yeah.
Miles McBride.
He's making his way with New York right now.
Mitchell Robinson.
Okay.
Also making his way with New York, right? Key injury for the Knicks this year.
Yeah.
Malcolm Brogdon. Excuse me? For a 36 pick, that's pretty solid, right?
Yeah. It's Brogdon it's a tough name around here, but yes, for a
But
36
here's the
pick,
thing
it
with
is.
Brogdon.
Yep.
Malcolm Brogdon is
The president?
what's that?
That
That's
was
right.
his nickname, right?
Yeah, you're right. He is a very, very smart guy, and my understanding is that Malcolm Brogdon, when he was here, was all business. And I don't mean all business like, I just want to win games. Malcolm Brogdon was like, I want this amount of money. I'm going to take care of my body. My ankle is bothering me, and that could limit me in terms of a bonus I could get, yada, yada. He was all about, the business of Malcolm Brogdon.
I respect the business acumen. I'm sure he was a very nice guy. I'm still upset that he played 5 games.
Understood. I totally understand. But the 36th pick typically is right on the back end of players that when you sign them or when you draft them, you are drafting them with the expectation that they are going to have terms of service with your club, as opposed to a two-way deal or a straight G League player, etc. The Pacers have a decision to make, Jimmy, because they have 3 picks. 2 of them are in the slot of, you would think automatically it's two-way contract guys. But they've got guys already that have been hanging around. Isaiah Wong, we talked about it yesterday. Oscar Tshiebwe, Isaiah Wong, Kendall Brown. They've got to figure out what to do in terms of, you only get so many of those spots. Do they just overhaul altogether that group of, I'll use the term project not to slight those guys, but you get what I'm saying, for lack of a better phrase.
Developmental,
thank you. Do they say you've had enough time and we just haven't seen the development necessary? Which way do you go with it? And then the other side of it is, because their roster is, from a cap standpoint in the roster, they're pretty much set. I mean, I don't think this is a team. Siakam was the big move. Maybe now they extend Nembhard and they get that done. But do you flirt around with or make some changes on your auxiliary pieces, or maybe even trade out of the draft to get future pieces or something to get yourself some sort of a salary relief in the next coming year? Those are things, Jimmy, that they have to consider, right?
Yeah, and you're also trying to balance maybe finding a piece. And I know they tried this before, and it didn't work out because the prospect that they took didn't wind up panning out. But maybe it's a situation where you're looking for somebody in the same age range as Chris Duarte a couple years ago. And I say that to mean somebody that played longer in college, that it looks like they are close to what they're going to be in the NBA with a couple maybe fine-tuned aspects here or there. Maybe there's somebody that you could find in the second round of this draft that
Kevin McCullough.
like a Kevin McCullough, a senior place player, a Cam Spencer, even though there's been questions about his defense at the next level, but somebody like that would fill a clear role in your rotation right away versus a developmental piece. That's the weird thing about this draft. There are often, at least in my lifetime, there have been weak drafts where, yes, the top level, it's like, I don't know what I would possibly do with the number 1 overall pick because it's so wide open. There's no consensus. But then you look later in the draft, and there's still value you can find. It doesn't mean you're necessarily going to find a all-NBA first-level player, but maybe you find somebody that's an immediate contributor. We mentioned Malcolm Brogdon. I understand that, I really don't care for anything that was mentioned with his Pacers career, but he did win Rookie of the Year as a second-round pick.
Oh, he's a solid player.
You can find, if your scout is on point and you have the type of investment that I believe that Chad Buchanan and Kevin Pritchard do within their front office, perhaps you find a diamond in the rough late in the draft. For them, it'd be their first pick, right? But late in the actual draft, around 36, or maybe they don't get careful with cap space, Jake. Maybe they get a little reckless, and maybe they think, you know what? Let's package a couple of these second-round picks, and let's move up to 26 and take a flyer, or not a flyer, but you take a potential development pick on somebody that's being overlooked. I understand the off-the-court stuff with him, but like a Terrence Shannon, or I'm just throwing names out there that are in this range. I'm not saying pick them. Khalil Ware, Darren Holmes, there are people that are in that range. Ron Holmes, excuse me. There are people in that range that might be worth a flyer getting back into the late first round. That it might cost you a little bit more on the cap, but with where this window is, you're right. There's not going to be much high-level contribution outside of a veteran minimum or an exemption that you're going to get in free agency. If you're looking for an impact piece, it has to be done with the picks you currently have.
I keep hearing Mikal Bridges' name thrown around. Not like the Pacers have an interest, but everybody just seems to think that he's going to be – it's because he's a 6'6" guy that can defend and score. But I would think that Brooklyn would require more to get him than Indiana's willing to give up.
Yeah, I mean, all that's being reported, and he's a coveted piece for exactly that. He is the type of player that would fit, in theory, if everything's just done on paper and nothing is done actually on the court, just putting up a paper roster, which we know is not how teams are fully built. But yes, he fits it perfectly. That said, a lot of the talk around the NBA and the rumor mill articles and all that, to your point, Jake, Brooklyn, price is too high.
Pat Boylan next.
If it's on your mind, it's
I remember back in my day, the way that sailor was singing. I was stunned later to learn about the Village People.
This is a great song, right?
Grandpa, it's 11
In the
o'clock at night.
In the Navy is a
What are
great
you
song.
doing
from
in my
them.
room?
I just went out to get some coffee.
Literally, it's I do that. I do that voice, and all of a sudden, it's like I'm doing a show with the Pillsbury Doughboy and like Howdy Doody, or like Pee Wee Herman or something. You guys like start giggling uncontrollably.
I mean, I think it just speaks to the
The
level
sad
that's our
thing is,
favorite
I'm
impression.
closer to that guy than I am to you guys.
It is true.
Right?
It is true.
Pat Boylan joins us on the program, and I'm sure thrilled to be doing so on that segue. He's on the CarX Tire and Auto Guest line. Of course, you hear him both doing radio for the Indiana Pacers, where admittedly it is the time of year, and I'm saying that to protect all of us involved, where there is limitation on what we can discuss regarding the Pacers in terms of transactions. That's an NBA rule. Pat is a member of the Pacers employment, so therefore we honor and respect that. Also, the Indiana Fever. And I will give you the choice, Pat. We shall begin with your decision. You want to start with Pacers talk or Fever talk?
Let's start Fever.
Okay. I said it, man, on my way in. I noticed that I was getting a little better fuel efficiency in my car, and I realized it's because it was being pushed down Capitol by the breeze that is the wind streak. We have a WNBA wind streak in Indiana. This is the result of schedule lightening up or the Fever figuring some things out. Your thoughts?
Yes, both. I think both have been dramatic, have had dramatic effect on all of this. The beginning of the season schedule, look, it's one thing to look at a schedule and say you've got a tough part here and an easier part here. That beginning of the season schedule was unlike anything I've ever seen in any sport that I've ever covered. But with that said, I thought this 3-game stretch was going to be maybe as important as any 3-game stretch all season long, because yes, you had that ridiculously difficult early portion of the schedule. Yes, it is and was going to get easier, but you had to avoid digging yourself into a real deep hole. Like had Indiana gone 1-2 over this homestand or something like that, then found themselves at 4-12, you're not out of it. And in the WNBA, 8 of the 12 teams make the playoffs, but you just don't want to be in a position and didn't want to be in a position where you're getting into late August, early September, you're coming back from the Olympic break, and you have to play perfectly to get where you want to go in terms of making the playoffs. So I thought this 3-game stretch was really, really important to kind of stabilize yourself a little bit. I was hopeful that they could get 2. If you could get 3, it's obviously ideal. They do get all 3. But I think it's been the schedule lightening up, and if there's one specific thing that stands out to me, it's just Aaliyah Boston has looked every bit the all-star starter the last 3 games at home after a little bit of a challenging start for her. And it's something that Christie talked about yesterday and maybe will with you guys too. But I think when Aaliyah is playing anywhere near this level, maybe difficult for her to play quite this well for the rest of the year because she's on just a ridiculous tear right now. But when she's playing near the level that she has lately, it just seems to me like everything else fits into place. There's less pressure on Caitlin. Kelsey Mitchell and Melissa Smith, their roles get a bit more defined, and they're able to excel in those specific roles and not be asked to do too much. And it's just struck me that as Boston has looked the version of herself that we all know that she's capable of, everything has just kind of made sense around her. And there's those 4 core players of Clark, Boston, Smith, and Mitchell. And the other thing that stands out to me, the last 2 games, that quartet has each played pretty darn well. There's been a different star night in and night out. But when you imagine what the Fever can be, you start with those 4 players, and if they can all play well, or even 3 of them play well, you're probably going to like your result more often than not. No coincidence, I think, that they've played well here on this homestand, and the Fever have gotten things turned around pretty dramatically.
Pat, you can only play what's on the schedule, and we've talked about the disparity for the Fever with top-tier competition versus lower-tier competition, and where they've had tremendous success with teams at or below their record so far this season. And it's also attributed, as you've outlined numerous times for us, that they had a very tough stretch, not just because of who they were playing, but the amount of games they were playing out of the gate. Now with this win streak, and really over the last couple of weeks, it appears as though they have clearly separated themselves in this front, at least in my vantage point. They are not one of the bad teams any longer. That's not to say that they are suddenly one of the elite, but they are no longer, at least from their mentality, in the ranks of the bottom of the WNBA with the corner they've turned. Am I putting the cart before the horse, or do you see that happening right now where maybe it's still a question if they're going to end up with the very best of the league by season's end, but what we're seeing right now is a separation moment of we're not the team we were a year ago of being destined to be trapped in the lottery?
I'm optimistic you're correct. Frankly, I was optimistic of it even at the beginning of the season just because I wasn't going to cast any sort of impression of this team while they were going against some of these superpowers that have built and had success and have the veterans that the Fever just don't have right now. So I don't know that my optimism ever waned significantly in that regard, but it's good to see when you do come home and you do have a regular amount of days between games and you have practice time and you can actually work on the type of things that you need to improve upon, which they couldn't do in the early portion of the season. You know, to your point, it was hypothetical and theoretical that would be advantageous, and credit to the team and the coaching staff for actually making that be true in actuality. That has been a positive for this team and that they have taken advantage of it. And I'll be interested here to watch the next, 10 games or so, because I think they have an opportunity to do exactly what you're talking about, which is Dallas and Chicago are playing right now. Chicago's got a lead. If Dallas loses, then you've got a few teams, unfortunately the Cameron Brink situation in LA happened. They're behind the Fever, and then the Fever have beaten Washington twice now, who's 2-13. And so hopefully what can continue to happen here, and now the schedule, I just talked about it getting easier. The Fever are about to go on the road for 5 straight, so that won't be easy by any stretch. But in general, they've got a pretty regular schedule the rest of the way, and a ton of home games in the back half. So as this team starts to gain some chemistry, I think separating from maybe some of those teams near the very bottom is a realistic goal, something I think they're really capable of. And making the playoffs this year, I think absolutely is the goal. I think there's a realistic understanding that, especially in the WNBA right now in its current climate, Vegas is the reigning champion. They had a historic season last year. New York was just a beat behind them, but very, very close. I compare where the WNBA is right now to if you took LeBron James's Miami Heat and played them in the same era as Kevin Durant's Golden State Warriors. To me, that's Vegas and New York. And we haven't even mentioned Connecticut, who actually has the best record of all those teams right now. So the WNBA is really top-heavy. The teams at the very top are not just good, they're historically good. And realistically, the Fever are building toward getting there, and it's something that probably doesn't happen this season. But I think what you want to see is a separation from where you have been the last few years, and the Fever did take a step or two significant steps last year in getting out of the basement of the league. And I think you want to build on that and get to the point where, okay, you're 12th a couple years ago, you got up to 10th last year. Can you get into 8th? Can you get into 7th? And if they get there, I think it will be the tangible jump you're hoping to see. And I think separating from the bottom of the pack here, they started to do that a little bit. But if they can continue to do so, I think that'll be a really positive sign.
Pat, you have been working, covering the Fever and doing games for them for how many seasons now?
This is 10. Not as the only guy. When I came in,
right.
Daenerys was doing most of it.
But I mean, just in terms of witnessing games and being around it, is this the most individual from player to player talent that they have had? And I know that it's just now coming together, but in terms of the talent base on the roster, is this as talented as any group you've seen?
So I started in 2015 with a team that was one win away from a championship.
Right.
And I don't know, maybe you could make an interesting case there, because even those like that 2015 team, it was a good roster, don't get me wrong, but it was a heroic Tamika Catchings performance.
Correct.
Even later in her career that got them there. Certainly 2016 on, that answer is yes. Even though Tamika was a part of one more season after that, that answer is unquestionably yes. But yeah, just from a general talent perspective, I mean, look, Clark and what she can be and what she's going to become, I think speaks for itself. I don't have to sit here and explain Caitlin Clark, I don't think, to anybody. Aaliyah Boston, I think most people either kind of knew about her or have learned about her, and this has been a really nice stretch for her. I mean, as a number one overall pick and an all-star starter in her rookie season, you've got a player that has the potential to be, a Hall of Famer and a cornerstone, I think, in your front court. And then the other two are Kelsey Mitchell and Nalissa Smith. And Kelsey was an all-star last year and is routinely one of the league's best scorers. And Smith was the number 2 pick a couple of years ago. And she continues, I think, to develop into a really nice WNBA player that still has a ceiling that I think is pretty darn high. And so when you look at those 4, I mean, the talent and, the dangerous P word there is potential, but the talent and the potential from those 4, I think is what makes things really exciting when you think about the future going forward. Of course, having a player of Caitlin Clark's ilk and spotlight is remarkably exciting. It's almost hard to describe in words how exciting it is. But when you have the young talent around her like the Fever do, as it all starts to mesh together, what can it become, I think is a fascinating question, and it'll be a fascinating journey to watch. And I think the key is, how do they fit together? How do they mesh? There were some early season questions perhaps about Clark and Boston and their fit. Well, they have fit like a glove here in the last few games, and both have been really good playing off of each other. And I think it's everybody else figuring out a different role. What Kelsey was asked to do 2 years ago is pretty significantly different from this year, and same for Nalissa Smith. But from a just pure talent, and especially like where the ceiling is, Mitchell's entering her prime, I would say. The other 3 are still so young and have so much developing to do. I would say this Fever roster it's a tough question because Tamika is in a league of her own and the Fever have won a championship, so I don't want to be too hyperbolic. But at least the potential of this group and what they all could become if they get close to their ceilings as a quartet, that's probably higher than any Fever team that has been around. They've still got to prove they can get there, but the young talent they've amassed is really, really impressive.
Pat Boylan is our guest, TV voice of the Indiana Fever on the CarX Tire and Auto guest line. Pat also, of course, sideline on the Pacers radio network. And Pat, this is kind of a reminder of the NBA with a question of the state of the WNBA, if you'll bear with me for just a second. The WNBA the NBA over the last 5 years, if you will, 4 or 5 years, has seen a shift from Big 3 era basketball to dynamic duos being the name of the game. You can have great teams as well, but usually it's now with the CBA and all the minutia of it, it is 2 stars and then build around them with high-level role players, et cetera, et cetera. Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum just won the title. LeBron James, Anthony Davis, Damian Lillard, Giannis Antetokounmpo, the whole list. Like there's duos around the league. In the state of the WNBA, when I look at the Indiana Fever and I'm reminded of that dream pairing of Aaliyah Boston and Caitlin Clark and what they could be together, I think to myself, man, if those 2 grow together, reach the potential together of an inside-out game that plays off of one another and benefits the rest of the Fever inherently because of that, that's enough to be a real threat and a real player in the WNBA. For the Fever, not just this season, but over the next 3 seasons, is the development of those 2, their chemistry, their playing off of one another, them making each other better. Is it as simple as that for them to reach the heights they want to go of that duo clicking, or is the WNBA at this stage of where it's at more truly reliant on, as you mentioned, 3 or 4 high-level pieces playing well together?
That's a really good question. And when I think about it, as you're saying it, and I'm thinking up my answer here, I do think for the Fever's big picture goals and getting right back into championship contention, I do think that Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston, the players they become, the chemistry they develop with each other, how that ultimately works on the floor, I think that is probably the most important thing to where this franchise could go. That's absolutely zero slight to Nalissa Smith, who's a really impressive young player, to Kelsey Mitchell, who has made an all-star team. And those players are going to be influential in that conversation, significantly influential in that conversation. But I do think that at the end of the day, what Clark becomes and what Boston becomes are perhaps the most important individual factor in team success. I don't think it's quite that simple. I don't think it's as simple as to say if Clark and Boston become good, that this team is a dynasty or anything like that. It's a team game, and it is more than two players. And the NBA comparison is interesting because you've seen a lot of duos. Look, James and Davis won a championship, but look at the Lakers beyond that. They have two fantastic players that have made some nice playoff runs, but in general, the Lakers have felt, at least to me, a little underwhelming because they haven't always had the supporting cast around them. So the supporting cast is very, very important. But when I look at the future of what this franchise can accomplish, the other thing about this, too, is a lot of people don't realize Aaliyah Boston was pretty darn young when she entered the WNBA, at least for a WNBA player. I know there's 18 and 19-year-olds that enter in the NBA, but a typical WNBA draftee is 22. Caitlin Clark is 22. Boston last year was 21 when she was drafted, and a lot of people don't realize that Aaliyah Boston is only a couple of months older than Caitlin Clark is. So they've got two 22-year-olds right now that have the ability and the potential to be, in my opinion, legends in this game one day, and they're within a few months of each other in terms of their age. And again, you got to be careful, cart before the horse and all of that, and there's a development factor at play here and a chemistry factor at play here. But the Fever are just so well set up for the long term. Now, that doesn't mean there's going to be this instant, extremely high level of success. Caitlin talked about it last night. You know, everyone wants instant results and instant gratification. And realistically, that's not going to be the case here when you're trotting out a bunch of players in their early 20s. But if you're starting to see those steps and the evidence that those players are starting to develop into who I think everybody thinks they can become, the Fever have the potential here to be building something that could be sustainably very, very good for a very long time.
Okay, Pat, here's one for you. Pat Boylan is our guest, by the way. He's on the CarX Tire and Auto Guest line. I'm assuming at some point, because you're a kid that grew up in central Indiana, at some point in your life, and if not, you can say yes and humor me, you have driven like on a family vacation. Have you ever driven to Florida?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll take St. Pete. I think most people listening are familiar with the St. Pete area or have perhaps even made the drive from Indy to St. Pete. So, Pat Boylan, I'm going to need you to put on your, imaginary hat here, okay? Think about the answer, and then just give me the answer, not necessarily even without with explanation, just your answer. If the Indiana Fever, as a team, if we were using the analogy, that once they are completely meshed and molded together and they, from a chemistry standpoint on the court, are exactly where they want to be, then that means they've reached their destination. And in this case, that destination is driving to St. Petersburg, Florida, starting in Indianapolis. Right now, where they are how far into the drive? The Indiana Fever bus is where on the drive from Indianapolis to St. Pete? And I have a follow-up, which is why I'm asking it.
This is why I love being on this show. So just to clarify, this is a St. Pete is a this season destination. Is that what you're saying?
St. Pete is a Christie Sides and Lynn Dunn go. It worked. They figured out how to play with each other, and we are clicking on all cylinders.
This season, correct?
Correct.
I have done this drive, by the way, so I can visualize it. I think you're probably in southern Kentucky.
Okay. So you're passing by, and you're going to stop and see where all of the Corvettes fell into the sinkhole. That's cool. Okay, now, so same question. The Indiana Pacers are where?
Oh, I like where you're going with this. The Indiana Pacers are in they're closing in on Atlanta, I would say.
Okay, so they have not yet gotten the free orange juice at the Florida Welcome Station.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, so the Indiana Pacers then, they stop in Atlanta. They're at the varsity. They're all sitting there having cheeseburgers, and Rick Carlisle goes, okay, everybody get back on the bus. We still got driving to do. And then Rick Carlisle turns around to Kevin Pritchard and goes, you know what? let's see if we can get one more guy on the bus. That player is the mold and does what for the Pacers that helps push them to the final line?
Yeah, I think it's probably the type of player, whether that comes internally or not, which I think is the first hope, right? I mean, you've got these young players like Andrew Nembhard and Jarris Walker and Benedict Mathurin. I think it's one more dynamic scoring, ideally perhaps a wing or a stretch four, and I think all those guys could potentially fit that role. Look, what Tyrese Halliburton can do is well documented. He's probably the best passer in the world right now, he or Jokic, and at his young age makes all of this so enticing. If the Pacers are, to go back to the beginning disclaimer you were providing, if the Pacers are able to long-term get Pascal Siakam locked up, then I think you've got a lot of important pieces already in your bus, so to speak. And I think it's just having that one more really dynamic player. And I don't know that it necessarily needs to fit a specific mold. I don't know that it necessarily needs to be a wing or needs to be something specific. But you look at the Brown and Tatum comparison, well, a guy like Drew Holiday and Derek White, I mean, those are all-star caliber players too. So I think it's potentially one more guy that reaches that all-star type conversation. And then it's ultimately being able to keep around everybody else too. I think the drive from Atlanta to St. Pete is probably the most difficult portion in all of this. Getting to where they are is not easy, but getting from good or very good to great, I think, is probably the most challenging step. And the biggest reason is, well, there's a couple. Obviously, in Indiana, you don't naturally attract the super high-level free agent, although I think as you start to get good, that potentially could change that equation some. But the cap and what you can spend becomes a much more challenging problem. It's a lot easier when you have endless money to spend to potentially bring in or acquire star-level players, but then that final step in trying to make all the math work, I think, is probably the most difficult aspect of all of this. I just think another, one more guy there that can play at the level-ish of a Halliburton and a Pascal Siakam, and hopefully it comes internally, it is probably is the next step for this team, going from, okay, they can make an Eastern Conference Finals to, okay, they're in this conversation. They're in this handful of teams that are realistically title contenders, and I think you've got a nice window here to do it. I think you've got a nice window to analyze what you have and watch these young players grow, and I'm sure the front office will be fielding plenty of calls because a lot of those young players looked really good on a pretty big stage for a month plus. And I think the front office is in a position where they don't have to force anything. They can be aggressive if they want, or they can take any kind of path that they want. But I do think this next step is the hardest, and it'll be fascinating to see how a front office that has made nearly every correct step and choice over the last few years, how they navigate maybe this final portion of your drive.
Okay, Pat, lastly, names only. When I was in college, I took a road trip to Denver with some buddies. We were packed into a car. We stopped literally like at a gas station, met some dudes we were from Kansas, met some guys from Kansas State that were going to Denver also, and we're like, you know what? We're packed. Can a couple of guys ride in your car? And they're like, yeah, cool. So we divvied up the cars. It was great, right? So the Pacers are at the varsity. They're in Atlanta, and every other NBA team has their bus there as well. And a couple of teams come over to the Pacers and go, you know what? We're interested in getting a couple of your guys and actually having them get on our bus and taking them away from your team. Is there any player you can think of that people would be surprised? I mean, we know Tyrese Halliburton. We know Pascal Siakam they're not going anywhere. But is there anybody that people would be surprised that you think Rick Carlisle and Kevin Pritchard would say, you know what, under no means are we letting that guy get on your bus? He is a Pacer through and through.
Yeah, I always struggle with the hypothetical of under any circumstance, because oftentimes there's a price for almost anybody. But I think the guy that probably jumps out the most to me in all of this that'll be fascinating, and I guess I'm not directly answering your question here because I don't know if there is anybody that has literally no price.
Right, understood.
It's pretty rare. But I think it'll be fascinating to see what happens here with Andrew Nembhard, because I think other teams probably watched this guy and said, wow, he would look really good, running our show. But this is somebody that I know for a fact Carlisle in the front office obviously loves. He was somebody that they found later in the draft for these specific reasons because they thought he could be this. Rick has talked all the time about how he feels like they got a top 10 player in the second round, and he's a good defender. He was a clutch player. They want to see him develop under their own wing. And so he's maybe the next guy that jumps out in terms of that, like, quote unquote untouchable, just because I think the franchise values him so highly. And he did take such a big step that, again, I don't know that there's not a price out there, but I think the price on a guy like he would have to be really, really steep because of what he's shown you, how you've developed him, how you got him. Once you put him in the starting lineup, it wasn't just him, but when they made that transition to put him in the starting lineup, that's when things really started to click for the Pacers. And, watching him in the postseason, that other teams probably went, wow, this young kid can play. But the Pacers have known that for a couple of years.
Pat, we appreciate the time as always. Next time you go to St. Pete and you got to drive, be sure to stop in Chattanooga. It's underrated.
I will make sure to do so, and I've actually never stopped at the Varsity, so that's going to have to be a
Varsity's also pretty good. Pretty good.
Yeah.
It is good. All right, Pat, we appreciate it.
Time, guys.
All right, Christie Sides, head coach of the Indiana Fevers, next.
This hour of The Fan is fueled by
Okay, Fever have won 3 straight. They're on their way to Atlanta to take on the Dream, that game being tomorrow night. Christie Sides, head coach of the Fever, joins us right now on the program. Eddie, several people have said quit playing disco, by the way. I'm not one of them. I got no problem with it. Christie Sides, I'm going to get right to it here because I know you guys are under a time crunch to hit the road. There was a lot of noise about the Fever when things got off to a slow start, despite the fact that there were a lot of new pieces there. And it seems like things are coming together. Was it hard to silence the noise?
Yeah, that was, the thing that we talked about in our first meeting. That was going to be one of the biggest hurdles that we were going to have to get over. Least experienced team in the league by far. New pieces brought in. We started this rebuild last year, laid a great foundation. That schedule just wasn't too nice to us early, so it was just really hard to find confidence, find rhythm. No practice time, playing every other day, and playing the best teams in this league. During that segment, so just a tough way to build confidence and team chemistry. But I tell you what, these players stuck together and showed up every day. I couldn't be more proud of them for continuing to just want to get better.
Have you had to make more changes through this course in terms of schematics and X's and O's, or in terms of approach and mindset?
Well, that's a tough question. I would have to say the approach, the mindset piece is what's top of mind for me. To make sure that these 12 players that are in that locker room are, that mental health is good. I mean, this has been something that none of us have ever experienced before, and it's amazing, guys, to play in front of the crowds that we're playing in front of. It's absolutely amazing. The expectations, though, are different, and so just trying to keep these guys – just know where we are right now. Keep the building blocks moving, keep the foundation growing, keep just getting better. So just making sure they were okay was, that was top of mind for me. And then you're always changing basketball. You're always trying to figure out, how you can get a win here, get a win there, not in the win-loss column, but on the court with your players.
Indiana Fever head coach Christie Sides is our guest. She joins us on the CarX Tire and Auto guest line. Coach, you have 10 games left between now and the Olympic break, where you guys are off for effectively a month from July 17th to August 16th. What are the pros and cons of that break, and does having that time off change at all the level of importance or pressure that's on these 10 games before that layoff?
Yeah, I think the pressure that we were under in those first 11 was, a way different beast than this one right here. So, right now we're, our goal is just to get better every day. And the pros and cons to the Olympic break. I mean, of course, we've got a lot of players playing a lot of minutes. It's going to give them an opportunity to get some rest. Caitlin Clark went straight from playing in college, playing the minutes that she's playing. She's going to get an opportunity to get a breather, get a break, rest her body. But I look forward to the practice times because that's, I'm going to have my full team, here, and we're going to be able to take this time that we didn't have at the beginning of the season during training camp to now kind of have another mini training camp in the middle. And with the way things are going, if we can keep this momentum going and then get to that break and then be able to improve during that break and then finish out the season, we played the best teams in the league already 3 times, so we're not staring them down, for another 2 or 3 times.
Bigger adjustment. Your veteran core learning how to incorporate Caitlin Clark's skill set, or Caitlin Clark learning how to incorporate her skill set to the veterans?
Honestly, I don't think there's a difference. I really don't. I think, where she was and how she played in college to come to this team and the way that we started this rebuild last year and how we played, it was, of course, going to have to take time and, the chemistry and the execution with all the different pieces. And, when you don't have practice time to do that and just get thrown into games against the people that can, if we make a mistake, New York can expose us and Connecticut can, make us pay for any little mistake. So we just didn't have that opportunity, any grace in those moments. So that's a great question, but I would say it's about the same on both ends.
Okay, so I'm going to put it this way, Coach. We just did this with Pat Boylan about the Pacers, so I'm going to ask you about your club. You're a native of Louisiana, right? So
I am.
I'm going to pretend that you're driving from Louisiana to Indianapolis, okay?
Okay.
So you're getting in your car, and at the beginning of your journey, is this roster at the beginning of this season. And to use the analogy, at the end of the journey is where your roster is completely where you want it to be from a chemistry and understanding, a timing standpoint. You are how far into the journey in terms of building this team the way you want to see them play? Where are you on the drive?
I am probably to Birmingham. That's where I think I'm at. I think I've gotten to Birmingham, and we're in a pretty good place right now. And that's only a few hours from me. And I would be coming from Mississippi, where my home is now. But hitting Birmingham right now. Once we get to Nashville.
Oh, you got all interstate. I mean, it's all good now, right? Like you've made it through a bunch of construction.
I did. Our team, we fought through. One of our words is resiliency, and I really can't tell you, these guys fought through and showed so much resiliency during that time. And as long as we keep fighting and we just try to find a way to get better every day. And
do you stop at Crystal Burger in Birmingham, or do you just go all the way to White Castle in Indianapolis?
I love the Crystal Burger. But, I do love the White Castle as well. So probably gonna hit both.
Well, Coach,
White Castle for breakfast.
You can have the varsity when you're in Atlanta as well, but try to keep the win streak going. 3 right now,
yes,
headed towards 4. I know that you guys are getting ready to take off, so I appreciate the quick chat today. But best of luck, and we will continue to talk about it. All right.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate y'all.
All right, Christie Sides, the head coach of the Indiana Fever. And again, I mean, they're getting ready to leave right then, so wanted to get to the brass tacks. That's pretty good, though. Made it over to Birmingham and on the way. I do think that, Jimmy, best way to say it, there was a lot of construction early in that drive, right?
Yeah, I mean, the schedule was, or the traffic cones, if you will, were insane in terms
They're
of
getting ready for a big rest stop.
Yes,
though,
they
right?
are. It's needed to be certain, and I get it, that the aspect of coaching in that league, yes, you want to win every game, but certainly you're mapping out for a team like that, as young as they are, it needs to be a positive out of the gate after the Olympic break. And it's made easier by, I'm not saying they need to win 10 in a row. Of course, they would love that. But I think if you're able to walk away from this 10-game stretch between now and the Olympic break, and with how many road games are in the mix there as well, and some tough opponents along the way, the Aces included, I think if you go 5-5, 6-4 in that stretch, I feel like you're really positioning yourself where you'd like to be, with the wiggle room, but also a solid foundation set up, as she mentioned, with basically a glorified second mini camp that will be at the Fever's disposal thanks to the Olympic break.
Forget the rest stop. We're stopping at Buc-ee's.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Good call by Eddie. Have you been, Eddie, you've been to Buc-ee's or no?
Yes. I
Jimmy?
have indeed.
Twice, yeah.
It's like a phenomenon. Here's the thing. Are we reaching Buc-ee's saturation, though?
It's hard. I'll say no, not for us, because A, there's still one not here, and B, it's still like a 3-hour drive to get to one.
I was going to say, this can get close to the NFL debate we were having about oversaturation.
Yeah.
Like it's so coveted that it's starting to make its way around.
But, like, I remember, okay, let me tell you a phenomenon like that. Krispy Kreme. When Krispy Kreme came to Indianapolis, literally, they opened up like freestanding Krispy Kremes where you could go in. Now I know you can get them at gas stations and whatnot, but they had Krispy, and literally.
Not the same, by the way.
Well, clearly, because I'll tell you what happened. In roughly 1997, 98, somewhere in there, Krispy Kreme, people are like, you've never had a donut until you've had a Krispy Kreme. And they are, I mean, they're good. Don't get me wrong, right? But Krispy Kremes opened in Indianapolis, and suddenly it was like the Crew car wash. Every time you turn around, there was a new one on a corner. And then you started getting 2 of them on the same corner, on opposite corners of one another at the same intersection. They were literally, the Krispy Kreme freestanding things were like rabbits. They just all of a sudden were everywhere. And everybody loved it. And there were lines, and it was like, and Jack in the Box is another one.
Man.
When Jack in the Box came,
Box line was insane.
I know, right?
Insane.
People were like, oh my gosh, they opened a Jack in the Box in Fishers, and there's a line to Beach Grove.
It's happening with Canes right now. One just opened
Yes.
Carmel and Thatcher Lane. There's
Totally,
one in Noblesville
right?
before that. Yes.
There's one in Avon.
And
They
then
were in Avon as well, yep.
Tim Hortons was one. Like when Tim Hortons opened in like Avon or Brownsburg or whatever, and people were like, oh my gosh, I got stopped at the border coming back from Canada. My entire car got tossed because I brought back 2 cans of ground Tim Hortons for my mom, which is like a number one sign for I'm peddling drugs. I have coffee grounds. And if you've seen Beverly Hills Cop, right? And literally they tossed my car, and Dave First and I got impounded at the border.
Did
for
you
like
get a
2
banana?
hours. I did not get a banana in the tailpipe. But all of these places, people went gaga over them for like 3 weeks, and then it was like, yeah, I've been there, done that. And I'm curious if that would happen if they opened a Buc-ee's like in Whiteland or in Whitestown, either one. It would be bonkers for a while, but eventually would the thrill go away? I don't know the answer.
I'll say
That's
this.
Shake Shack to a degree.
Shake Shack is another great one, Eddie. Perfect.
I'll say this in regards to Buc-ee's. Considering that I passed two we were driving from Charlotte to Cape Canaveral when I was on vacation a couple weeks ago, and we stopped by one Buc-ee's, but we passed effectively two, right? Because we stopped at the one and then we passed another one. The lines were absolutely insane at the intersections before the Buc-ee's, and you look at how much they have sprouted around the South. I don't want to necessarily jinx Buc-ee's, but like it appears to be height proof. Like fast food wise, at the height of lunch and dinner service time, the two restaurants, at least from our Indiana perspective, that I see, two fast food spots that I see busier than anybody else. Anybody want to throw a guess? Two fast food restaurants that just from the Indianapolis side of things, dinner time or lunchtime, they're always busy. It's always out to the
Chick-fil-A.
Yes, that's number one.
And that's the one to me that it always blows me away, Jimmy, not to take from the other one real quick, but Chick-fil-A's been around for 40 years, and then all of a sudden it was like 8 years ago, boom, it was constantly packed, and I'm like, it's really good, but it's no different than it was 15 years ago, so why it's only been in the last 8 that people went crazy over it? So that's one of them.
Yeah.
You're saying there's one more?
There's one other one. Not as the Chick-fil-A, it's like there's a solid 6 miles between the two in terms of height, but it's always busy. Your staple place for really any of them, breakfast, lunch, or dinner, it's always packed.
Hit me.
McDonald's drive-thru is always busy. Not the
That's
Chick-fil-A
true.
level, but it's
the
always busy.
The one on Meridian's always busy.
Yes.
For
I
sure.
guess we'll have a test run when Wawa comes here.
That's right. Wawa's but here's the thing, though.
I've never heard of Wawa until this, by
Okay.
the way.
People from Jersey and Philadelphia are going – if you are from New Jersey or Philadelphia, I'm going to ask that you turn down your radio for the next 15 seconds and then turn it back up. Please do not change the station. I love Philly. I'm down with Philly. Don't turn the radio down yet until I'm done with my disclaimer. I love Philly. My buddy Doug Weiler, one of my best friends, lives in Philly. Love Philly. Been to several times. Been to the Liberty Bell, all of it, right?
There's a butt coming here.
You love the Philly fanatic.
I do love the Philly fanatic. Thank you. I even like what's the other fella's name? The Flyer one that everybody thinks is so weird. I think I'm cool with him. I'm down with him. He's cool, right? Eagles, got no problem with it. First YMCA football team I played on, Eagles. No problem with Philly. But to compare Buc-ee's to Wawa to Buc-ee's or vice versa, that literally is like saying, we didn't get LeBron James in the free agency sweepstakes, but bring on Malcolm Brogdon.
The hat was on the table.
That's right. The hat was on the table. We didn't get Kawhi Leonard, but we drafted him. Let's go. All right.
I
mean, come on.
I think Buc-ee's, especially within the Midwest where it's still uncharted territory for them outside of the one in Kentucky, I think that it is saturation proof.
You know what it is? It's the smell. When you walk in and they've got that, and they've mastered this, they're pumping through in the AC units the smell of the like roasted sugar, like pecans or whatever it is, the roasted nut
brisket?
smell. Well, you don't even smell the brisket though. It's more like like when you're walking through the mall and they have like the candied nuts section.
Sure.
It smells like that when you walk in. So it just smells comfortable immediately. And then you go and before you buy yourself a 64-ounce drink of beverages like that's a mile long, you decide beforehand to be preventative. So you go into the restrooms and that literally all of a sudden is like, holy cow. It's like Hawaii. Like you go to Hawaii and you think that Honolulu is the real deal. And then you're like, wait a minute, there's a whole other island of Kauai and Maui and the Big Island. At Buc-ee's, it's like that. You go in and the smell itself and just the overall size of it is amazing. But then you're like, wait a minute, there's another island of briskets and then another island of jerky and then the Big Island, which is the bathrooms, which is a whole different, and the beaches are pristine.
Coming to Yankee Candle this fall, Comfortable by Buc-ee's.
That's right.
It just has all
I'm
those
telling
scents
you.
right in there.
See, this is the stuff we do. Do you guys ever just sit at night when you're not – and, Eddie, I know that you're an insomniac, and when you're not watching Fast Times at Ridgemont High for the 6th time in 3 days, do you ever think to yourself, you know what? Thank goodness that guy's random brain droppings can occasionally just come through and precipitate my life and give me things like that. Jimmy's going to make $1 billion on the Yankee Candle Comfort by Bucky's scent. He's going to make $1 million on that, and I just threw it out to the global conscious, and then boom, he took it and ran with it.
It's definitely going to be me because I have a candle obsession.
Do you really?
Oh, we have like 20. It's bad.
Eddie, do you know this, by the way? I like candles as well, but here's the thing. Did you know that candle's bad for your kitty friend?
Really?
Yeah, they have to be a soy candle. And don't use eucalyptus.
I don't have eucalyptus.
Mm-hmm. Don't use it. It's bad for the cats. Not good for their.
How's catnip work?
What? I'm telling you, I know this because myself being the responsible cat owner of the group, I'm aware.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
You're only competing against Eddie. I don't have a cat, so I mean, you're not. way to win all those titles in the 50s there, Celtics. Good job.
I'm just telling you.
Back in my day, we didn't even have soy candles.
Rowdy Gaines, by the way, you've heard him on television. You've seen him on television. He's obviously synonymous with the sport of swimming, and there is a pretty big event taking place in Indianapolis. You might have heard us talking about it, unless you're Josh. And Rowdy's going to join us to talk about that at the bottom of the two. I thought it was coming up at 2 o'clock, 2:30, right, for Rowdy Gaines? All right, 2:30 for Rowdy Gaines. We'll get back into a little conversation about the Pacers next.
Want to explore using Mitsubishi Electric?
Eddie.
Yeah.
Let me read you what Bruce sent to me.
But Jake, you said you don't mind it, so I'm
don't
doing
mind
it
this
for you
guy.
now.
You know what's fascinating? The other day I was listening to the Casey Kasem American Top 40 from like 1976, I think. And it was
Were you in your rocker while you were listening to this?
I found an old cassette tape.
And it was fascinating because you had this confluence of the wind of change of like three different kinds of music, because the yacht rock stuff was kind of like right at its apex. But then you had the introduction. For example, one of the songs that was playing was it was the debut song from Boston. And, Casey Kasem's like, and now the number 24 smash of the week. It comes from a band that named themselves after a city. And it was Boston, and so you have like the classic rock stuff, but you also had the intro of disco coming in that was kind of pushing both of them aside. And and then of course you had Disco Demolition Night a couple of years later at Comiskey Park, and all hell broke loose, which is one of the great nights in sports history. This from Bruce. Please, no more disco entry songs. I'm still working through my PTSD from being the social chairman of the Fiji House at Purdue in 1979 and 1980. I had to play all disco music at every party to keep the girls happy. Yeah, well, you got to do what you got to do, right? Hey, y'all want to go to the Fiji House this weekend? They're playing some more of the Bee Gees. Yeah, okay. And then that Eddie Garrison, he's so cute. We can get him to play it for us on Clarion Company. And then after that, we can do the old man and just hear him go,
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Pacers getting set for the draft.
Smooth segue.
Roster, you like that?
Yeah.
Well, like I said, there was no smooth segue to the disco era either. It just all of a sudden came up like when you least expected it, right? You're sitting around and you're listening to some Steely Dan, and the next thing you know, some dudes are walking around in leisure suits with, cymbals in the background. Jimmy, the kind of player, like, for example, I mentioned earlier, everybody, and this happens every year this time of year, there's some player that teams get fascinated by. Like, they got to get him. They got to get him. And the world's going to end if they don't get him. And then it becomes like the watch, right? Every day. Has anything happened? Have they made a trade for him yet? And it feels like Mikal Bridges is that player for Indiana, because somebody along the way has decided that a guy that averages 20 a game, that's an all-defensive player and can play the wing, that is on a franchise that has kind of fallen into obscurity and anonymity and is looking to unload contracts, that Indiana's the perfect place because that's the third guy they need. Problem is they're going to have 75% of their payroll tied up to three guys, and I don't know that necessarily fits in. And what would you have to give up? One of those pieces would be Jarris Walker, probably or presumably. I'm not saying there's been conversation of this, but hypothetically, it would seem he's a piece that people would still find intriguing.
He's a perfect piece. Yes, he would be the perfect piece, but it's not realistic because of the cost.
You're talking about
Bridges. Yes.
Right. So what I'm saying is, the Bridges conversation aside, if we shifted the conversation to Jarris Walker, are you willing at this point to say that you've seen enough body of work with Jarris Walker to say we know what he is or what he can be and we're ready to move on from it? Or do you think there's still something there to be found?
I don't think that you could possibly fairly say that you've seen enough to have a clear decision on Jarris Walker based on the minutes that he had or lack thereof last year, based on the logjam that was in front of him in his position. You've got to see him in the G League, and he looked nice in the G League. Like, he did well down there. Really good year all around for the Mad Ants last year, from Isaiah Wong's development to Oscar Tshiebwe winning G League Rookie of the Year. They had a really great team last year with a lot of pieces that you can be proud of as an organization moving forward. But Jake, I think that's the wrong question. The question isn't, unless you think Jarris Walker is the type of player that could be a 3-and-D guy where you're moving him onto the wing and can be that missing piece for you. If you believe that, then yeah, he's a non-starter on any trade talks. And to be clear, the amount of money that we're talking about here in a purely hypothetical of Mikal Bridges, and he's on the wish list for a lot of teams. And the rumor is that Brooklyn, the Nets, they want no part of trading him unless it's an incredibly high-level treasure trove of picks. the reality is, if you're talking about a Mikal Bridges trade, not only would it involve Jarris Walker and you being comfortable with moving a rookie piece of his caliber, you're probably saying goodbye to Miles Turner based on where the books are at. Like, and maybe you're not doing it in that trade, but you're certainly probably doing it next year when he hits free agency. Like, that's a real conversation that you have to have with yourself. I think this team is missing that piece. I'm not saying it's Bridges, but Bridges is as likely as Paul George in terms of what it would have cost to acquire a piece like that, but that is what you're missing, and I don't think it's on the roster right now.
There's one thing also not only not on the roster, but probably not on the horizon. I'll tell you that next.
The Wake Up Call with KB and Andy.
This.
I think
Are you
it's
just
spite.
being a rebel?
It's spite now.
Yes.
Yeah, it's definitively spite.
You said you were fine with it and you encouraged it.
I didn't encourage it.
They did.
I just said it's fine. But you guys can work in and mix in if you'd like some more contemporary music.
What's you guys? I'm just clapping along here.
I mean,
There's only one mission control here. His name's Eddie Garrison.
I don't know if you know or not, but at times I have the capability, the potential to, from an audio standpoint, be a walking nightclub, right? Like, Eddie, are you much of a singer, rapper, lyricist, that kind of thing?
No.
Jimmy?
Not really, no.
Okay. Because if you were and there was a song that you were wanting to do, all you have to do is put underneath. If you closed your eyes right now, and we're going to get to the Pacers talk here in a second, but if you closed your eyes and you're trying to think about, I mean, I'm old enough to remember in the bars in Broderpool when they'd play the siren noise and then a fella would come out with a roll of toilet paper on a machine that would just blow toilet paper streamers through the air and everybody'd go
Sick.
bonkers. You know what I mean?
Sick.
But every bar back then had this in the background.
Oh, yeah.
So you play any song, and I do that, and then instantly we can put anybody onto South Beach, right? I mean, you could be sitting right now in a strip mall in, on the west side of Indy, right?
I can do that sound, by the way.
Go ahead. You want to? Okay, if we did a, mine has a little more bass to it. If
Yours
we
is a little
did
more
that,
slower.
What's that?
Yours is a little slower.
Second half century.
No, that's because you got to feel the bass, Eddie.
Duh.
Right?
You want
But if you were to play a song any song becomes instantly a club song when you pull up "Sailing" by Christopher Cross. Just play for me "Sailing" by Christopher Cross. Now, Christopher Cross, I think JMV loves Christopher Cross, and he still tours around, and you see him every once in a while. And this guy was the absolute star of the early 80s until he went out during the Academy Awards and sang Arthur's theme at the Oscars, and was like totally awkward, and people were like, whoa, wait a minute, this isn't what we thought. Do you have "Sailing" or Arthur's theme, any of them, from Christopher Cross? Now, okay. Now that sounds tranquil, right? And then and boom, right? Now what you've done is Christopher Cross over, and you've crossed over into a party time.
I would argue and push back against that and say that is one piece to the make it party time equation. I think you also have to speed up the track a little bit to match the.
Well, yeah, Christopher. But here's the thing: Christopher Cross's music is one aspirin from a coma, so you got to speed it up like 3 times, right?
Sure, whatever you got to do.
Really speed it up, and then you got something there. Breaking news, yes, Eddie Garrison.
We have officially seen your golf swing.
Oh, yes, that's correct.
Go to 1075 The Fan
now,
on Twitter, or you can go to our Twitter at Curry_Company.
When you see my golf swing, there are a couple of things that I would like for you to keep in mind. Number one, that was videotaped after I had gone to a golf lesson, and I have tennis elbow. So it when it does flare up, it's a little bit like I don't go all the way through on my swing. But
gosh, who filmed that? I mean, just the walk-in from left to right to get the swing, and then the close-up of you delivering that message. What I assume is for Franciscan help. Whoever filmed that, I mean, that's just top shelf.
It was an
right
amateur because they filmed it portrait, so it doesn't fit the whole screen. So.
Well, I think the person that filmed it was asked to film it that way for social media purposes, and truthfully, it should fit the whole screen if you're on a mobile device.
Look at Jimmy. By the way, Jimmy, if you're claiming that was you, it was not. That was actually the video that was shot by David Woods.
No, this one right here I filmed. It's directly from your phone outside of that bay. I walked in. It was me.
No, hold on.
We've given away the plot.
Which one?
It's not the one you're thinking of. It's the one where you promote Good for the Heart.
Oh, okay. I thought it was the one promoting. Sorry about that. That does. You're right. Now, having said that, my swing, considering that I touched a golf club for the first time on March 1st, Eddie, you would rate the swing how? How
7.
bad?
7.
Not terrible, right? Passable? I don't go back far enough on my backswing, for sure. But nonetheless, July the 18th, by the way, the Fan on the Back 9 Golf Tournament presented by Franciscan Health. It's all going to be at Back 9, and you can see right there, if you see the video, Back 9 is very, very cool. Tickets are on sale right now at 1075thefan.com. That's our website, 1075thefan.com. We'll be broadcasting live, so too will JMV. Food and drinks there as well.
It's going to be a great day.
Chiefs fan Steve will be there, and Jimmy will be in his Mahomes jersey. So it'll be fun.
Asking you might receive, Jake, so be careful.
That's right. I think that there was the thought with Pascal Siakam now in the mix with the Pacers going forward, and obviously Tyrese Halliburton, and you mentioned Miles Turner. There were a lot of people, because they got 4 years and not 5 for Siakam to commit. There was a lot of thought or speculation that they were going to go out and get a third player, or that this frees them up to move some things around and get a third player. The ideal player for the Pacers, if money was no object, even though he is now entering into maybe not total twilight, but exiting his prime, but the skill set itself for the perfect player for the Pacers is Paul George. I know people don't want to hear that, and I know that people want to joke about playoff P and the disappearances and whatever else and the way that he exited. But his skill set is exactly what most teams need, because it's probably the rarest skill set in the NBA. A 6'8" or higher player that can guard on the wing and hit threes at routine level. And Paul George can do those things. But even at his exiting prime era of his career, his price tag is such that they simply are not going to be able to afford it. And I've seen people, and not credibly, but I know that that's been discussion of, like, could they get that kind of a player? I'm not even saying him particularly. That kind of a player. They're going to have to resort to probably the tier 1 or 2 below that. Like when we talked about, if you had to buy 3 cars for $150,000 total, and you had to do a luxury car, a service snow vehicle, and then a practical car, the Pacers now are at the point where they're buying the practical car to be able to complement that duo. And they've got good pieces on lower contracts that are going to allow them to grow those, and maybe one of those becomes it. The guy, going back to it, that I'm fascinated by in a circular conversation here, Jimmy, though, but Jarris Walker to me is fascinating because Walker, I saw somebody say, like, he showed moments of brilliance. Did he? I thought more often than not when Jarris Walker went in, he was rushing things and looked uncomfortable, if you really want to know the truth.
I would argue, though, and you said this the day after the opener against, I think it was Washington, if I remember correctly, you had mentioned that he looked like a deer in headlights when he first got out there. That was like, just look in his eyes. It's like, oh man, he looks a little nervous, like he's rushing stuff. I did think in the time that was allowed to him, and there was not a ton, but in the time that was allowed to him, I thought that he showed growth, considering the low floor that was there out of the gate to where he was then, and also what he was able to do within the G League. The fact of the matter is, for Jarris Walker, there was a logjam with where I think they wanted to have him positionally. There was a minutes issue for the Pacers of where he could be placed. And if your argument is, oh, well, as they started to get injured or later in the playoffs, why was he not a part of the rotation? Because the rotation they wound up shrinking down to 7-8 guys was sufficient enough that they didn't need to throw him out there. And it wouldn't be fair to throw a rookie that hadn't been fully a part of that rotation already to the Wolves in the playoffs. So he's an unanswered piece at this point. I think you couldn't possibly, good or bad, you can't possibly look at what Jarris Walker did last year in just the NBA. If you want to incorporate the G League, maybe you can, but stick with just the NBA for the purpose of this conversation. You can't possibly look at what Jarris Walker did for the Pacers last year and say, clearly one way or the other, maybe it's time to move on, or I think this guy's a franchise piece. It's incomplete.
It is. And I go back to, Jimmy, Austin Crosher, Jeff Foster. You know, I've told the story about the 2000 playoffs when the Pacers were, it was either 2000, I've got to look at the years in which they were drafted. But in one of the playoff series, it was Jeff Foster's rookie year, and the Pacers were playing in Milwaukee during the playoffs. And at like midnight, there was a 24-hour hot dog place in downtown Milwaukee. And I went into this hot dog place and sitting at it was like a greasy spoon type joint. And sitting at the counter eating a Coney dog was Jeff Foster. And I remember, I walked in and did like a double take. And I'm like, dude, do you guys not have bed check? And he looked at me and goes, let's be real. Do you think they're going to notice if I'm not there? Because he wasn't even active. It was the 2000 season, I'm pretty certain. He wasn't even active during the playoffs. I think he played in like 15 games the whole season. So you're like, well, wait a minute. This is a guy that they traded Vonteego Cummings for on draft night, the first-round pick or early second at the most, and he's not even on the roster. Like, he's a bust. Well, he turned out to obviously be a very, very good player for a very long time for the Pacers for over a decade and a real important piece for them in many, many areas and a very popular player. But you couldn't judge it based on that rookie year. Austin Crosher, same way. Barely cracked the roster as a rookie and just sat and learned. And then when the number was called, you're like, oh, wow, okay, there is something here. And you're hoping that's what Walker is, right, Jimmy? And that it was just – but it does feel like, in particular at the beginning of the year, there should have been opportunities where he was on the floor, and then it gives you pause of, were they holding him back for a reason?
I don't want to make excuses for players, but I said it in my first answer to start this segment. There was a logjam in front of him. There were players that were more experienced, that were more in tune to what the Pacers wanted, whether it was Isaiah Jackson, whether it was Jalen Smith. You look throughout the roster, there was a logjam there for where minutes to be available for him. The other thing I would mention, and again, this doesn't mean that I'm comparing the two players. It does not mean that I'm saying that this is a guarantee for the type of player that Jarace Walker can become. But the hardest thing to do in today's society, especially as a sports fan, is to be patient. You want everything immediately. You want success now. You want wins now. You want championships now. You want playoffs now. You want all of it right away, because we as a society are, and I'm as guilty of it as anybody, but we are a TikTok shortened version. Give me the summary. Give me the action right there, right now. I want it.
Instant gratification.
Instant gratification, Eddie Garrison. Home run out of the park. Jarace Walker's 20 years old. He played, a season of college basketball?
Right.
Like, it's not just that his NBA career is incomplete. Him as a player is incomplete. Like, you don't know what he's going to be. And when I said, I'm not trying to draw the comparison, the Celtics were not always completely patient in their process, but they were deliberate in their process. It took, 6-7 years for Jason Tatum to finally be an NBA champion, for Jaylen Brown to finally be an NBA champion. Yes, they made it in 4 years, and they were in the conference finals, I think his first or second year in the league. They wind up losing to Cleveland in 7, but they were on the doorstep there. And even then, the Celtics made drastic roster makeovers, and they changed things, but they still had high-level patience and command, led by that front office, led by Danny Ainge, and the baton pass to Brad Stevens. And I believe Chad Buchanan and Kevin Pritchard, and maybe I'm naive with this, but I believe they have the willingness, and certainly Rick Carlisle does as well, to have that same patience with that roster. Yes, there's always inherent timelines. We talk about the back half of Pascal Siakam's contract and how old that he'll be at the end of the 4-year mark when he's turning 34 and he's getting paid, $45-50 million towards the final 2 years of that deal. And the pressure of that window, sure, that's inherently there. But the prospects that you have, like a Benedict Mathurin next year and the expectations for him and the patience that's been practiced there over the last couple of seasons, that same patience is required with Jarace Walker. Because, again, he's still 20 years old. It doesn't mean he's going to be an All-NBA player, but it certainly doesn't mean he's going to be labeled a bust of a pick after one season in the NBA. I think that I would, unless it was an otherworldly player that made a ton of sense, I want to see Jarace Walker given the same patience and opportunity that the Pacers as an organization gave him last year. I need the fan base to try and have that same level of patience with him.
Breaking news, this just in. Jimmy Cook says that Jarace Walker's the next Jason Tatum.
Thank you.
Right?
It takes time.
No, you're right.
And not every organization has the patience for it. The Pacers do. And to be clear, I would think if you're a Pacers fan and you've been, as hungry as they have been for just a series win. Like last year, the bar was, hey, get out of the play-in and maybe win a series for the first time in a decade. How cool would that be? I would hope that to some extent, the Pacers fan base has trust that has been built there now with Buchanan and Pritchard after a incredible over-exceeds expectations run to the conference finals last season. I'm not saying that should be enough. I'm saying it should buy trust into what they're doing.
You know, players, few things fascinate me more than situational things for players. Like, you wonder when guys get drafted into certain areas and they have all the tools and they're can't miss and then it just doesn't work out. How much of that is just they went into a bad situation where they couldn't grow? Like, a good example, I recall do you remember Jahlil Okafor for Duke? He was Duke, right?
Yep.
When he came into the draft, I mean, he was a can't miss. He was a great player at Duke. He was, he's a third overall pick. I just saw that guy's name this week where he was selected in the expansion draft for the G League. Now, do you know what that means to get selected in the expansion draft of the G League? That means that there were G League teams a G League team that didn't protect you. Now, probably because he hasn't been playing there, he's been playing overseas. But you go from the number 3 pick in the draft and bouncing around to different teams, and then and now you're playing overseas and you're still chasing it at the age of whatever he would be now.
28.
And yet, this is a guy that I think as a rookie, if I'm not mistaken, had a good year, right? I'm pretty certain. Wasn't he like a first-team all-rookie performer? He averaged 18 a game as a rookie and then completely flames out. And you're like, what happens? Is it situational? Is it not being used the right way? Is it mental? And I say that because to present the other side of it. With Jarris Walker, he could be Austin Crosher or Jeff Foster or a guy that just waited his time, and then you looked at it and you go, okay, yeah, he was worth the wait. Or it could be that during the important, formidable years, something happened and it just never took off for him. And in Okafor's case, it took off a little bit, and then something happened and boom. I don't know if it was injuries. I mean, I don't know him that intimately, but how do guys fall off that much and just lose confidence where all of a sudden then it's over? And I worry about that sometimes with young players, that if you don't tap into it and get them going soon enough, that then you got a problem.
Well, part of that as well, and I'm not saying this is solely the reason, but it goes back to my point about trust within an organization. That was right around the time, if I'm not mistaken, I am correct on this, that was still in the process. That was right towards the tail end of the process in Philadelphia,
right.
Where they were going to be bad, and they were going to get these picks, and then they were going to be great. And, I mean, Joel Embiid, really the only crown jewel from that group, and look where they're at. And we could go on and on about Joel Embiid. I think he's a great player. I do enjoy watching him play as a versatile big man, but he can't stay healthy, right? There's still a flaw in that plan. But there is certain levels of blame I would probably place on the 76ers front office, among other things, for a flame out of a career like what happened with Okafor. Just because that you trust a front office doesn't mean that it's going to wind up being a successful NBA career. But for 33 games last year for Jarris Walker, a ton of time in the G League, I'm going to trust that a Pacers organization, like we compare the two franchises all the time. A year ago, we were saying transformative years for both the Pacers and the Colts. And for the Colts, there's a brief reprieve, not for Chris Ballard, but for some of the building because, well, Anthony Richardson got hurt and you don't know yet. It's incomplete there. But for the last 6 seasons post Andrew Luck, the argument has been, why should you have trust in Chris Ballard? Why should you trust him to build? The Pacers last year, I think for a lot of fans, that label of if you had any doubt with Kevin Pritchard and Chad Buchanan, that was flushed by the wayside because of what they built last year. They've earned that trust. That doesn't mean that they should be blameless. That doesn't mean that if they wildly underperform next year with a healthy roster, that question shouldn't be asked. But of the two franchises in the last 365 days, the Pacers, I think, have warranted more trust. That front office has warranted more trust in, hey, just because this guy played most of his season in the G League doesn't mean there's a plan there. He's only 20 years old. Let's give it time. Whereas over at West 56th, there's still a lot of question as to what the heck is going on.
Now, this point from my buddy Andrew. Jake, winning a series is not enough at this point. The Pacers have not won an NBA title since joining the league. They've only won the ABA title. I'm tired of being patient.
Well, I understand that frustration. I do. They've also, regrettably, for some of their best teams, whether you want to point to the Brawl or whether you want to point to Jordan and LeBron, they ran into generational high-level talent that stiff-armed them along the way. Like that Pacers team that lost to the Heat both years, there's a very real chance that they could have been NBA champions if they would have got past them. Spurs were a great team, but that's the what-if game. They've been close. Sometimes the fates don't align. Sometimes you get stiff-armed by a generational talent or a generational talents with Bosh and Wade. There's been moments. And I get it. If you've been a Pacers fan throughout, patience is tough, but it's also the market that you're in. You can't snap your fingers. And Bobby Marks said it yesterday, it doesn't even matter as much about the market anymore. You can't just snap your fingers and make a champion with how the CBA is constructed. It goes back to the patience, Jake, with Jason Tatum. It took them 6 years, 7 years to win a trophy when they had two players now.
And that was a major theme in their celebration, right? Of them hey,
right.
How do you like us now?
When Jason Tatum was mimicking every championship celebration of the last 10 years during his
he did that
went around on TikTok and Twitter. Anyway, all that said, Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum are viewed as one of, if not the top duo in the NBA right now, and it took them 7 years to get there, and that's with all the resources the Celtics have. I get it, wanting a championship, but it's not just one series, it's 2 series, and an appearance in a conference finals with a largely young core. Doesn't mean that they're suddenly going to win a championship now, but boy, are they on such a better trajectory than we were a year ago. A year ago, pondering if they were going to be an 8 seed in the play-in, to now there's gripe on social media, and I get it, it's the summer, so what are you going to talk about? But Jake, there's gripe on social media of, why aren't the Pacers favored higher by Vegas than the Lakers and the Warriors to win a title next year? And that just wasn't a conversation we were having a year ago.
By the way, I don't know if I've told you this or not, but I love Jaylen Brown's game. Have I mentioned that before?
You have.
I'm a huge fan of Jaylen Brown.
It's insane, though, right? Just a year of growth has totally changed the conversation around this franchise. And I'm not saying it's going to produce a championship, but man,
it beats the alternative,
it feels
right?
so much better than the alternative that we were sitting in a year ago.
Yeah, it totally beats the alternative. I mean, that is undeniably true because, boy, when you look at the Pacers over the, more often than not, they've been competitive, but there were some lean years there for sure, right?
Yes.
I mean, the Dunleavy-Murphy years and the brawl, the post-brawl, I mean, some of the guys they had to bring in here, it's amazing that they were even able to flip Artest at all, right? And then Artest does the image flip and everything else, and you're left wondering what could have been. Eddie, you have been to the U.S. swimming trials, correct? Or you have not. That's right. Jimmy, have you been?
I haven't either made it yet, no.
Okay. Mark Dykton, that's who I think went.
Yes.
Mark's wife got tickets. It is very cool. And, I was able to see a world record there, which was, obviously people saw it on TV, but by total luck, when I went, I was able to see a world record. It was very cool. And Rowdy Gaines went bonkers during that.
He is so energetic.
Yes.
Energetic. He's fun to listen to.
And so he is a big part of why people, I think, have enjoyed watching it. And we're going to talk to him next. Is that right, Eddie?
That is correct.
Rowdy Gaines of NBC next.
This hour of The Fan is fueled by
truthfully needs no introduction, especially this week in Indianapolis, because not only have folks here in the Circle City been watching his work talking about the Olympic swimming trials, along with Dan Hicks, which, by the way, you can watch again tonight, 8 o'clock on NBC. You can also stream it on Peacock each night from tonight through Sunday as swimmers from around the country try to punch their ticket to Paris, sign the postcard, and go to the Olympic Games. Rowdy Gaines is the analyst, of course, for NBC Sports swimming coverage. He is a 3-time Olympic gold medalist. In fairness to Rowdy, that number probably would be higher, if not for the fact that no fault of his, the United States boycotted the 1980 Olympic Games. But in 84, getting gold and joining us now as a gold analyst for NBC Sports. Rowdy, how are you?
Good, Jake. How you doing, buddy? Thank you for the kind words.
Hey, I'm great, and I'll tell you what. I'm going to open with this. I'm a lifelong Indianapolis resident. And I am, I can obviously remember the days in the natatorium and, Greg Louganis and Mark Lindsay and the diving and swimming stuff that took place there. This is a whole other level. And and I'm not trying to carry the water, pardon the pun, for the city of Indianapolis because I bleed the torch here, but I just think this has been a home run all the way around. But I'm biased because I grew up here. Your thoughts, first off, on Indianapolis putting this event inside Lucas Oil Stadium?
Well, first of all, and I mean this sincerely, I think Indianapolis is the greatest sports city in the country, hands down, because they get it on so many different levels, Jake. It's not just about professional sports, which is through the roof, obviously, with the Colts and the Pacers, Fever, et cetera. But it's also an Olympic sports town. They love I don't know, it's like the peaks and valleys of drama with everything to do with any kind of sport. And they've always embraced my sport, which I'm really appreciative of. We have, we don't have a Wrigley Field or Fenway Park or anything like that, where a pool is old. We have IUPUI, right? I mean, that pool, that's where I made my Olympic team 40 years ago. But then to take it to a different level, like you said, and put it in a football stadium is just crazy.
And with that, this is, Rowdy, I say this a lot. I make a living asking dumb questions, and this one is amongst the top probably. But I'm curious from a swimming standpoint. I was thinking about this as I was watching. I went the other night. I saw Smith, get the world record, and it was fabulous to be able to say that I witnessed that. And
yeah, that's cool.
It was great, yeah. And I'm watching it though, and I'm wondering to myself, the lighting and everything else. When you're a swimmer, a pool is a pool, but it is a different venue with different depth perceptions and other such things when you're on the platform. And notably, if you're doing the backstroke, probably different vantage point looking upwards, getting blinded by the light a little bit. Is it different, and is it a challenge for the swimmers in this venue versus a typical natatorium? And if that's the dumbest question you've ever been asked, feel free to tell me.
It's actually not a dumb question at all. In fact, we talked about it on the broadcast a couple of days ago. I think we might have done it during the prelim.
I think you guys talked about it with the backstroke in particular, right?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, oh yeah. That's because that's the only problem stroke is the backstroke. The other three, it's no big deal. But we dug into it because it can present a problem because the roof is so bloody high, right? And it changes patterns all the time. Normally in a natatorium like IUPUI, it has these beams that you can follow, and the ceiling is lower. This one has this gigantic scoreboard right in the middle of the pool, and then it's got all these puzzle-like beams up the top. So, yeah, it does create some havoc for the backstrokers, I think. But, it's a lot better than swimming outside, which is what they're used to doing. A lot of these kids are, especially in the summer. So I don't think it's that big a deal. I talked to Ryan Murphy, who won the trials here, and he said, no, it hasn't really bothered him because they use their peripheral vision. I don't want to get into the weeds or anything, but they use their peripheral vision a lot, and they still can focus on something and keep it pretty straight.
Rowdy, where would you place the level of impact that Indianapolis has made in its selling pitch to potentially retain the Olympic swim trials and get them again in 2028 when it's such a big year across the board, for this country and the setup and the lead up to the 2028 games in LA.
Well, I think that's why I was so impressed with the vision. Man, it's just not for the faint of heart to do something like this. Dude, I mean, it's a huge undertaking for a swimming meet, right? I mean, I swam here 40 years ago, and I think I had 15 people in the stands, and half of them were my family. That's my line of the week. Is it's just the sport has changed dramatically in the last 40 years. But I think Indianapolis does such a great job, and I think it's a no-brainer. And maybe I shouldn't say this because it's not been decided, but I think it's a no-brainer. We come back here because now they figured it out. I mean, they're going to make mistakes being in a situation like this, but now any mistakes that they make, we'll know exactly what to do next time. And it's in LA. It's in the Olympics is going to be in LA in 2028. So what a great leadoff that would be to come back to Indy and really put on a great show again.
Rowdy, long before you were at the natatorium on your way to Los Angeles to the Olympics, and long before you were swimming for Auburn, at some point you had to jump into the first pool that you swam. That pool was where?
So believe it or not, it was the Holiday Inn in Winter Haven, Florida, where I'm from.
Okay.
And I grew up in Florida, so I knew how to swim. But the first time I ever swam competitively, I was a junior in high school. I was 17 years old. And the only heated pool in town in February in Florida, it's cold, was the Holiday Inn pool. And so I snuck in there one afternoon to see what I could do before tryouts. And that was my experience.
Now I know you say it's cold in February in Florida, Rowdy, but cold is relative, okay, in terms of that.
Okay.
No, I get what you're saying. But here's my point. So when you dove into that pool at the Holiday Inn in Winter Haven, Florida, the thought of swimming in Los Angeles in the Olympics was a whole different thing. Nobody ever would have thought that when you're in a Holiday Inn pool. And before we get into, because I do want to talk about what's going to be taking place at Lucas Oil between now and Sunday and some of the different things you're looking for, but I led off the show today, and I want your thought on this. It sounds crazy right now, just as it sounded crazy to think Olympics when you're at a Holiday Inn, but it sounds crazy right now. But I think the conversation should begin of Indianapolis starting to set its sights 40 to 50 years out of trying to potentially be another Atlanta and catapult itself into Olympic host conversation. Am I crazy?
That's no joke. That's no joke. I swear to you, that's no joke. I think Indianapolis would be a perfect Olympic host city. And I'm not talking 40 years. I'm not going to wait 40 years. I think in the next 15 to 20 years it can happen. They're going to wait probably at least 20 years before they let an American city host an Olympic Games. But Indianapolis would kill it. They've got the infrastructure already in so many different places. They've got the logistical thing made up. The airport is fantastic. They've got the hotels. They've got everything already basically here. So it's like LA. It wouldn't cost that much to produce. I say that in, relatively speaking, obviously, but I think they could do a bang up job, and I'd vote for them in a heartbeat.
Rowdy Gaines, who will be the deputy mayor with me when I run for mayor of Indianapolis, all the scooters are going in the White River, by the way, Rowdy. That's the one thing you got to agree to on my platform. Of course,
Absolutely.
You can watch Rowdy coming up tonight, beginning at 8 o'clock on NBC, along with Dan Hicks, also on Peacock tonight through Sunday for the swimming trials. Rowdy, if you could, your impressions on what we've seen so far, and for those that are going to be tuning in tonight or attending through Sunday, what we still have to watch for in storylines.
Well, quickly, we've had two world records, Gretchen Walsh and you, the one you saw, Reagan Smith. That's the first time we've had a world record set in an Olympic trials since 2008 when Michael Phelps did it. So it's been a long time coming. So already, the competition is great. We've had an American record. We've all seen some excellence in swimming. And then we really haven't seen Caleb Dressel in his two best events, the 50 free and the 100 fly. He got third in the 100 freestyle last night, so he's not going to defend his gold medal, but he's going to have a great 100 fly and 50 free. And then Katie Ledecky swims the event that, started it all off for her back in 2012. 12 years ago, the 800 freestyle. That comes up Saturday night. So I mean, there's lots of great fast swimming. I still think we're going to see another world record too.
Rowdy, from the national perspective, and we had on Chris Plum earlier in the week, and he talked about the development of Carmel Swim Club over the last 30 years and just their national dominance, certainly at Carmel High School. We get somewhat numb to that, even though 38 straight titles on the girls' side is an insane number. Like, I still can't wrap my head around that, but we get somewhat numb to it because we see it every year when the titles are handed out and they're earned. From your standpoint as a broadcaster and as an ambassador of the sport, what Carmel Swim Club and what Indiana as a swimming institution has built, where does that land in terms of the incredible scale compared to what's happening elsewhere around the country for this great sport?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, Jimmy, because I think when you talk about Indiana, think about all the great swimming that's come out of Indiana. First of all, you start off with Mark Spitz, even though he wasn't from here, he went to school here, and Doc Councilman, who might be the greatest. He's like the Bear Bryant of coaching swimming. And then you come all the way forward to Lily King and Cody Miller, and there's so many. The list goes on and on. So this is a great swimming state, dude. There's 50-meter pools in high schools all over the state, not just one 50-meter pool at one high school. I mean, they're all over the state. So I know basketball is king here, but a close second has got to be swimming. I mean, come on. And I'm on your show, for crying out loud, and you're talking about swimming. Come on. I mean, I wouldn't be on the show unless you guys, appreciated sports somehow or another. So, yeah, it's a great state for swimming, no doubt about it.
Now, wait a minute. I just want to make sure that we're clear here because I think we just actually set not a world record, but it might be the first time, at least publicly. Did we just get somebody that swam at Auburn to subliminally say that Bear Bryant is the king of college football coaching?
Actually, it's Nick Saban. I hate saying that, too, but I love Nick Saban, by the way.
Yeah, you're right.
I don't like Alabama. I'm like Charles, who's a good friend of mine, who said on the broadcast the other day, I'd rather Alabama lose to Afghanistan than win.
I was gonna say, man. I mean, wow, that's that was a Freudian slip right there. Although you're right, it probably is Nick Saban now.
Totally, I get it, but I still think those two coaches are the best ever. So anyway.
Hey, I wanted to ask about this too, Rowdy Gaines, before we let you go, and I find this fascinating. In terms of pools themselves and the challenge from an engineering standpoint of what Indianapolis has pulled off, can you let our listeners know, we talked about it at the beginning of the week, but what is the challenge in making a fast pool and what makes a pool faster and more swimming advantageous than others? And it would appear as though Indianapolis hit that mark, correct?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you don't break a world record in a slow pool. So basically it's two or three major points. One is the depth of the water. Again, I hate getting in the weeds with this, but quickly, when a swimmer dives into the water, he produces waves that bounce down to the bottom of the pool, right? And that can create turbulence if it bounces back up in a shallow pool. Well, this pool is 10 feet deep, so that's no problem. They dissipate. The gutter system, so when a swimmer swims, water's going to bounce up against the gutters and then bounce back. These are flow-over gutter systems, so the water just flows right over the edge. And then it's the third thing, which might be the most important thing, is the ambiance of the building. One reason why Indy is so fast over IUPUI is because of the historic part of that building. This is so fast because you've got 20,000 people a night at a swim meet. These kids don't swim in front of 20,000 people. That doesn't get you juiced. Nothing will.
Rowdy, one of the things I think that makes the Olympics, and one of the reasons why NBC does such a good job with the Olympics is because it's about it's about sports that we don't often watch, and more so it's about the storylines of it. It's about the kid that started out at a Holiday Inn pool, etc. What's the best storyline remaining for us to watch here in terms of just an overcoming the odds? Does anything jump out at you of, man, I'm not supposed to have rooting interest, but it's hard not to root for this kid?
Well, one was last night because, again, this is the story of the Olympic trials. What was the old Why World Sports thing? Thrill of victory and agony of a defeat. Because Will Lacone, you don't know who Will Lacone is. Yeah, nobody outside the swimming world knows, but he's been third or fourth in like 5 different events at the Olympic trials throughout his career. He started in 2012, and he's been third or fourth, literally, I think 5 different times. They take the top 2 guys to the Olympics. And the times he was third and fourth, he would have won a medal most likely at the Olympics. That's how good our sport is. The woman who finishes 6th tomorrow night in the 200 backstroke, she'll finish 6th. They take first and second. 6th place would win a medal at the Olympics. That's the story of our sport in our country. We've been number 1 in the world of swimming since 1956. Tell me another sport or team that's been number 1 for 68 straight years. You can't do it.
You know, I was watching, Rowdy. I turned around to the guy next to me. Hadn't met the guy, but it was neat to experience the things that I did in watching it in person on Tuesday night. And we were watching one of the events, and whoever came in, 8th was well back.
Right.
And I turned around to the guy next to me because it was a final, and I said, that guy's swimming right now that's coming in the, a few in the lane way behind. And I said, that's the 8th fastest swimmer in the United States of America. Think about all 50 states. Think about every kid in every pool in every school, and that's the 8th fastest. And yet, and that is, that's unbelievable. It's impressive, and it's a privilege to watch it, right? And
yep, no question.
A privilege to watch you guys as well. Again, tonight, 8 o'clock on NBC, Rowdy Gaines and Dan Hicks. And Terry Lingner, our mutual friend, just pointed out to me, Rowdy, that along with the gold medals from the 1980 Olympics, you were also owed several Emmys. So hopefully those will be coming soon as well.
No. I don't care about that. But thanks, guys. I love Terry, by the way. Great guy.
He is the best, no question. Rowdy, we appreciate it and enjoy the remainder between now and Sunday.
Thank you, guys. Anytime. Take care.
That is Auburn University Olympic swimmer and Indianapolis champion, Rowdy Gaines. Going to be deputy mayor. The first thing we're going to do, we're going to dump all the scooters in the canal, but we're going to get all the water out of the canal and the White River, both of them. Actually, the pedal bars are going in the White River. We're going to get all the water out of that because we got to save it for the pools next time we bring the Olympics here. Olympics by 56, baby.
Make the short trip to experience Antler Point Golf.
Got some baseball bets to throw your way, but first, let's take a trip across the pond. Euro 2024 still ongoing in Germany. Group play rolling right along. One match left to play today. It is Spain versus Italy. Kickoff at 3 o'clock, just 9 minutes from now.
Bellissimo. Bellissimo.
Indeed. We will take both teams to score. So yes to the answer to the question of both teams to score at minus 115. In that same game, we're taking a double chance. That means both of these results can hit and your bet would still be cool. Tie or Italy to win outright, that at minus 160. A tie, a draw, or Italy, double chance result is the bet there. One other soccer game, it's not in the Euros, it's in Copa America, the big tournament that the United States are involved. Argentina and Canada get things started tonight at 8 o'clock. We'll take Lionel Messi of Argentina as an anytime goal scorer. In baseball, we'll take the Milwaukee Brewers to win on the money line over the San Diego Padres. First pitch at 9:40. And the big rubber match between the Baltimore Orioles and the New York Yankees. We'll take cute fella Baltimore Orioles to win out right there at plus 136. Juice. Eddie, any bets for you?
Have you noticed what he's been doing all week, Jake?
Saying cute fella?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, they're playing the Yankees, by the way.
That's cool. That's a big AL East rivalry match up there.
You've bet the cute fella every single game.
I'm 1-1 so far.
Let me tell you, you can feel the tension from all across 465 of that Orioles-Yankees rubber match.
4:15, first pitch. Eddie, any bets for you?
No, sir.
Now, I don't know this for a fact.
It was a good one last night. Went to extras. Orioles got them, though.
But I watch a lot of that intervention.
We won.
And they say on intervention, one of the first things that they say usually before the family, and then the guy comes in and he says, I've been around your family for the last couple of days, and they just love you like crazy, and now they're just willing to fight for you. So they're going to say what they want to say, and you're going to say what you're going to say, and then they move on. And usually, like, the rock bottom for people is when they're waking up in the middle of the night to bet on Copacabana, like you just said.
Copa America is a big tournament, and I will also say I thought it usually ends with, Johnny, we just want you to be okay. That's all we want.
We just love you like crazy. I'm just saying. So,
Copacabana. Come on.
The Copa's, that's different than the
Copa America is different than the Euros. This is a tournament that is exclusive to usually just to South America, but it's expanded to North America for this specific edition.
I thought that was America.
Which South American country do you think the fewest number of people realize is in South America?
That's a good question.
Like I have a
Colombia?
South American country in mind that I think a lot of people, maybe it's just because I'm the only one, it sounds European to me.
Colombia?
I think most people probably know Colombia's in South. I think most people know that, right? Just because of, like, I hate to say this, but like just the Escobar and that history, right?
Sure.
What about Uruguay? I feel like I think for me, I don't know why, but Paraguay and Uruguay I confused with Portugal. And so I always think that Uruguay is in Europe, but I know it's not. That would be my guess.
Yeah, I won't fight you on that. Maybe Argentina, if you get like Spain mixed in there, maybe you think that it's
see
there.
that.
Maybe, I don't know.
I mean, I think most people, obviously Brazil, because that's, it looks like a horsey, South America, and Brazil is the nose and the face of the horsey from the side on the profile shot, right?
Bolivia?
Ooh, Bolivia is a good one. That's a good one. Is Belize in South America or Central America? I think Belize is in Central America, is it not?
Central America.
Yeah, okay. I always get Belize and Bolivia confused. Is there anything that sounds more American than two guys getting confused by any country outside of Indiana?
It's the staple of this, and probably why they don't usually let North American countries into Copa America.
Bellissimo. At least I know that much. What does that mean? Beautiful? Is that what that means?
Take your word for it.
I hope I just didn't swear in Italian. Is John here today? John is here today. JMV is up next. We are with you at noon tomorrow. Want to thank everybody. Rowdy Gaines, by the way, Christie Sides, Pat Boylan for joining us, and for you folks for listening as well to Query & Company. Back at noon tomorrow here on 93.5, 107.5 The Fan.
Let us give you an excuse to skip work.